Hi, good morning. Janice Morgan from Ocean Hill, Brownsville. I'm here with Community Board 16. Brownsville is one of the communities with a rec center that is currently offline. And we know what the challenges have been with bringing that rec center back online. And so hearing that, this is sort of a universal problem across the city, I'm curious as to what recommendation you all may have discussed when having some of these meetings with the new administration. And if there's any ideas about how to really address this problem moving forward so that future administrations can make sure that they are addressing improvements or just renovations or just even making a proper assessment on these rec centers moving forward so they don't become 40-year-old or 150-year-old rec centers with issues and they're offline because, thinking about the fact that the World Cup is coming, every community should be able to experience, those types of events locally within their community, and our rec centers should be a place to make that introduction to future generations so they understand globally that, these opportunities exist and they see it all show up in the community they live in, as opposed to needing to go to Central Park or to Prospect Park to experience that stuff.
I think, I would love to hear, especially with thinking about recreation. Brownsville is such an interesting example of that rec center because elected officials and the city worked so long to get money just to do the roof over, which took a really long time to get, I think $10 million so to get the roof. They opened up with the roof and found out the rest of the rec center had to be completely overhauled because these rec centers are about 100 years old, Robert Moses' time. So I think first off, I would just say giving parks the resources from the get-go to fully identify the critical needs of these rec centers, to me, is a no-brainer. Kat, do you want to talk a little bit about the Met Pool?
Well, thank you for bringing up Brownsville Recreation Center, which is featured in the Center for an Urban Futures report as an example of this systemic issue. We were talking about going on tour with the rec centers, to be honest, Sunset Park, Brownsville, to highlight the issues, hear from community members and leaders like yourselves, and draw the attention to the issues because it's really problematic. And right now, when we're messaging, communicating to the mayoral administration about the budget, examples like Brownsville's Recreation Center really drives home that message. So I'd love to connect with you separately.
Can I just say one thing? I mean, maybe this is sort of obvious, but just to add to the importance of these spaces, I was talking about those round tables, right? Every single time we go into a community, the thing that they say they want the most is a community center. There's just this real interest in having affordable or free third spaces in neighborhoods, and a lot of these rec centers have those in addition to like the gym or whatever. And I think it's really important that we keep that in that conversation too, because every community needs a place for kids to go after school, for stuff to do, to have meetings like this, and those places provide that.
I think also too, just when these facilities go off for 2 to 3 years, what's the alternative, right? Is there other? Do we think creatively? Are there modular facilities? Are there? I always think of this picture from, I think, the 60s or 70s under John Lindsay, where they carted in play pools for kids to swim, and it's an amazing photo. I don't know what the insurance and liability are on those pools,
They
but
were disgusting.
yeah, they're one of my favorite photos. I'm just thinking outside the box a little bit.
Can you get some dumpster pools?
Yeah, some dumpster pools. Yeah.
We had them.
Yeah. Okay, who else? That's a great question. Who else got a question?
So thank you folks for coming. So I'm Carl Henry Cesar from Community Board 14. So a procedural ask and I guess a proposal to piggyback off of your point regarding the rec centers. So given that we have decades, my question is Parks working in conjunction with the various groups here, including the borough president, elected officials, to have a list of all the requests from 311 and all the systems that existed before 311 in terms of these things? Because before 311, there were other processes for collecting that information. So I'm thinking one of the possible reasons why things have fallen through the cracks is because there's also been different systems for gathering that information. And so if that hasn't occurred, my question is, have either, the borough president's office or some elected officials or some advocacy groups or maybe even the Parks Department thought about coming together to just collect all of those requests? Because that may be the leverage you need to then say, hey, we need increased funding, because even if you don't care, we found 50 years of requests, right? So that's that question. So that's that proposal really. And then the second question I have too is, have any of you, I guess, any clarity in terms of how these things are prioritized? Because there's so many groups and so many rec centers and so many things that need help, but like, what is the prioritization to decide which one is gonna get this funding first versus the other? So that's my proposal / ask, and then that's my question as well. Thank you.
Mario, you want to ask that question? Also, Colin can take it up.
So thank you. One of the things I do is I meet with community boards and we look at what their needs and desires are. And often we'll go out in a van and kind of dream together what a park is now and what it could be in the future. And that's how we got things like Betsy Head and a few other things like that. The other thing I do is meet with elected officials, and my job is to suck up to them and say parks are more important than DOT or education or whatever. But that's really not how it should be. So if anybody's recording this, take the recorder off. Listen, a basic play area of a playground costs $6 million average size. I shouldn't have to ask Councilmember X or Borough President Y, I know his name, for that money. When that is 25 or 30 years old, there should already be money in the budget for that to be rebuilt. When a baseball field is 25 years old, it's worn, it doesn't drain anymore, there should be money in the budget. When pads in Prospect Park are 50 years old, they're worn, they need to be replaced. We have, Met Pool is a 1920s bathhouse. And doing a couple of $1 million for HVAC and a couple of $1 million for the sidewalk, to quote a good friend who spoke yesterday, is bullshit. I didn't say that, I'm quoting what he said yesterday. That needs to be gutted and brought to state of the art. If you haven't been to Shirley Chisholm Center, God bless Jemani Williams and Farrah Lewis, it was $147 million, and it wasn't a renovation, it was built from the dreams of the community. It's got a pool, it's got a gym, it's got multiple use classrooms. These other buildings are converted locker rooms from Robert Moses era pools from the 30s or Met pools to the 20s. And in the instance of Sunset Park, we're enclosing the center atrium. But there's windows and doors and stuff. And the BRC, it wasn't just the roof. We had $20 million to make moving around in the park where kids can be in one area and adults can be in another area. It was 5 separate buildings from the 50s assembled together. It wasn't a planned thing, it was the boys club back then. Happily, we have the $160 million to demolish and completely rebuild to the dreams of the community, a very frustrated community as we are, because it was closed 10 years for the other project, and now it's on a design build. We just had a meeting the other day because we're trying to move that along. But you have Red Hook Pool, yes, a pipe burst as we were filling it for the season. And it's a 1930s pipe, and we did the fastest, procurement, but that took us to sometime in July before we can open. There is several $1 million, I don't remember the exact figure, for Red Hook Pool. It's not enough to completely rebuild. And so we should be looking at these things. We always prioritize worst first. But there's so many, in every community board, there's playgrounds that are tired, that need funding, and it should be automatically funded. It should be in the budget. And greenways, yeah, absolutely. And greenways are a great way to connect with all of these parks in an environmentally friendly way, in a health conscious way. I could drop about 40 pounds on my bike myself. And I want you to include Coney Island, we'll talk later. But we should, please turn the recorders off. When I see there's $100 million in the budget for the next phase of the Manhattan Loop Emerald Necklace around Manhattan, that's nice. That's a suburb. Brooklyn's the real deal. We should have an emerald necklace around Brooklyn, and it should have bike repair stations and restrooms and drinking fountains and lighting, solar lighting, and things like that. And I don't want to throw DOT under the bus, but the section between 69th Street Pier and Bay Parkway, they walked away from, and I'm maintaining without any budget or vehicles or staff to do. And I probably said more than I'm supposed to say anyway, but I hope that answers your question. We prioritize worst first, but this is New York City. We shouldn't be the 13th best park system in the world. We should be the #1 park system in the world. And if you invest in neighborhood rec centers, and if you invest in that, there's outdoor fitness, there's indoor fitness, you would have less to invest in enforcement and corrections and so on. You build better communities, you build better citizens, you build better seniors, better parks, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
John, I just want to add in, I'm not an expert on rec centers, but I think as advocates, as community board members, I feel strongly, unfortunately, we cannot control timelines. We can control information. And so I just want to hold up the Greenways scorecard. Thank you, Kathy. That we as a Greenways Coalition put together and released in January. And we basically created a report card for the Mamdani administration, which includes Coney Island Gap. So you'll be happy to see that, where in April, when 100 days are up, we will report back, like, how did you do? These are all things that we know are possible within the first 100 days. So I think, just to answer your question about rec centers, I think sort of, following these timelines, which can get so delayed, it's confusing for us as professionals and community board members. Try explaining this to just the average person who just wants to, go for a walk or go for a swim. It's very hard. So I think we all can kind of follow models just to distill the information, publicize it, and hold, the elected officials and others accountable for progress. So I would this is all online if folks want to look at this, and I'll leave these posters nearby.
Okay, folks, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much to the panelists for the great questions, to Marty for your response. We're on to the next panel. Thank you so much, John, Kathy, Lacey, Hunter, for an awesome conversation to kick us off. So I'd like to invite my panelists, Morgan, Rosamond, and Deborah from Community Board 16 to come on up to kick off a conversation about making capital projects and infrastructure work for communities. So thank you. Thanks, Deborah. Deborah Williams. Oh, thank you. So quickly, the last panel got into some really fascinating conversations and details about the nitty-gritty of what we need to build and what the city can do to make infrastructure and capital projects work for communities. I acknowledge that not everybody is a municipal finance nerd, but for those of you who do read the Citizen Budget Commission's reports, they pointed out last year for the 2026 fiscal budget that $1.4 billion for parks was included in the budget. Only 0.6% of that, or $627 million, was set aside for maintenance funding, operations, staff salaries. The rest of that, $290 million for fringe and pension, which are also important parts of the benefits of working for city government and making the case for strong quality hiring in city government. But then a considerable portion of that, $516 million, was debt service, which, for those of you who don't know, the maintenance and operations funding is basically based on the taxes and other revenues that the city collects. When we build stuff in parks, it's mostly through debt. So that creates obligations going forward, but still points out that nearly $500 million gets spent every year investing in communities, transforming places, the life prospects that Lacey pointed out, or the neglect that Kathy pointed out, and several points in the capital process can be used by groups. that can advocate both for new infrastructure and for better ways of funding and maintaining existing infrastructure. And I'm really excited that we've got 3 incredible advocates here who know how to do that, who know the ins and outs of that process, and are making incredible leaps in communities across Brooklyn. So we've got Morgan Monaco from the President and Park Administrator of the Prospect Park Alliance, Rosamond Fletcher, the Executive Director of the Fort Greene Park Conservancy, and Deborah Williams, the Chair of Community Board 16 Parks Committee. So thank you all for joining us this morning. Morgan, I want to start with you, since in a lot of ways building and maintaining Brooklyn's backyard is very much the core of your work. Enlighten those in the room who might not know, how exactly does the capital process work, and how does the Prospect Park Alliance approach its capital investment strategy?
Great, thank you. And that was a great, the prior panel was a great segue to this conversation. So I have a slide here, if we could advance, that shows the process. So before we even get into design, I take my little tin cup, which is a little rusty at this point, and I go to Albany, and I go to our council members, and I go to the borough president, and I go to City Hall, and I say, hey, we need this bathroom fixed. Willing restroom is on my list right now for FY27. I only have $2 million. It's a $5 million project. I need three more million. And every year, I shake my little tin cup, and I say, please, sir, can I have some more? And sometimes they listen to me, and sometimes they don't. But once we actually have all the funding in place, and I find out, just like everybody else, on July 1st, so the city budget comes out at midnight, I download it, it's very exciting, it's like Christmas morning, and I Google Prospect Park, and I see what's actually in the budget. This is how it happens. And then we say, yay, we got the $3 million, yes. And now we can get to work on Willing Restroom, finishing putting the design together. So we have 3 phases: design, public review, procurement, and construction. And for design, we start with scoping, right? So we kind of look at the historical documents, see what was there from the original master plan from Olmsted, see the current conditions. Often we need some subject matter experts to do soil borings. We need to kind of get an engineer to look at the HVAC or the roof. And then we go to the community. So we have the incredible community committee, some of whom are in this room, members of our community committee. We go to the community board to say, how do you use this space? What would you like to see here? And then we really go into a full year-long design process. Sometimes it takes a little less, usually it takes actually more than a year. Then we continue our public review. Prospect Park is unique in that we're both, we're landmarks, so most everything we do has to be reviewed by the Landmarks Preservation Commission, and then also the Public Design Commission, PDC. So we present our schematics to the community board, the borough board, and then we go to Landmarks or PDC. Finally, once we have an approved design, then we go through a year-long procurement process. So we actually are lucky, we have in-house designers, we have architects and landscape architects who actually their offices are just below us right here in this building. And we put together construction documents, and then we hand everything back to the city. We go to the Olmsted Center, we say, here's the construction documents, and the Parks Department actually takes over. And they do a public bid process where they say, we want someone to come build a bathroom for $5 million. The bids come in, and the city has to take the lowest bidder, right? By law, they're required. So if somebody comes in at $5,200,000, they cannot select them. And we know the rationale behind that, trying to save city money, but there's also problems with going with the lowest bidder. So once we go through a year-long procurement process to sort of say, okay, yes, we pick you, construction firm, then we go into construction, then we take back the contract. 9 times out of 10, we take over the construction supervision. It's our staff who, again, are in the offices downstairs. And we, for 12 months, 18 months, we come every day to the site. We manage the construction project. We supervise the construction project. We host a groundbreaking when we start and a ribbon cutting when we close. So that in a nutshell.
Wow, whirlwind. And you get paid to do this every day, but for those of you in the audience, this is presumably very much the same process that anybody else advocating for capital improvement projects in parks has to go through. So I'm sure Morgan will have more to say going forward in the Q&A for anybody who wants to learn more about how they can shape that, since she is in fact an expert. Thank you for that, and I think I want to touch, we'll touch later on the role of engaging community in that process. And on that note, Rosamond, I want to turn to you. So Fort Greene, over the course of the last 10 years, has won an incredible amount of capital funding, some of which has multiplied. I think initially it started at $7 million, but then added a 20 onto that. So would love for you to share a little bit about how that process unfolded, what work will be done, and how the Conservancy has used it as an opportunity to build community. And maybe specifically, you can touch on what those improvements are going to do for the neighborhood and the social and civic benefits that they'll provide. And what is provided for the Conservancy through that process and what you've learned.
That's a lot of questions, but I'll
You've got 4 minutes.
And I hope we get to the groundbreaking of this
We will.
project in the coming year. I know Commissioner Marr has been waiting for it, and Dave, right there, Dave Barker, Administrator of Fort Greene Park. Yes, 2015, 2 administrations ago, the former Parks Commissioner Mitchell Silver launched his Parks Without Border initiative. And that encouraged everyone to submit proposals for projects. And Julian, I think you may have been involved in this a bit.
A teeny bit. I've suppressed most of it. Repressed most of it.
So Julian was at the Conservancy at the time and very involved in helping to get this project going. And I think there was a lot of momentum in the community. And I don't want to get too much into this, but I will say that, this project has been delayed. This is the only Parks Without Border project that has not been built. And it's a shame. And it's a shame because, unfortunately, a very small amount of people in the community have had a very loud voice and collected enough money to have multiple lawsuits against the Parks Department for this project.
All of them lost.
Yes, and all of them lost in the last lawsuit very decisively, I will add. In terms of the scope of the improvements, it's $24 million. I don't know if it's grown since the announcement of 24, but costs go up, so we'll see. But it really, the most important thing in these improvements is that it focuses on the north side of Fort Greene Park. And if you've been in Fort Greene Park, you know that there are, unfortunately, sides to the park. The area has a lot of income disparity. There's 3 public housing developments 2 directly adjacent to the park and 1 just a little bit further, where 12,000 people live in public housing. And so that disparity, with that disparity, you end up seeing this sort of play out in the park. And one of the things we're really, really excited about is that these investments are going to improve the north side of the park, where, Commissioner Marr was talking about these, really ancient facilities. We have paving from the 1930s, or I should say we don't even have the paving in certain areas anymore because it's gone. You twist your ankles on it anytime you walk across it. It's really hard. We took the Myrtle Avenue Seniors Advisory Group on tours of this project, and they couldn't even move along this area because they couldn't walk on the pavement with a walker. And so it's really, really important that the north side of the park is improved. It's also really important that it's addressing accessibility in the park. So Lacey spoke to health and accessibility, ADA accessibility concerns. We're actually going to get 3 new ADA compliant entrances along the north side of the park. And even more importantly, there's going to be multiple paths added that add ADA access up the hill. So Fort Greene Park is a huge hill, and it's really hard to get up the hill if you're in a wheelchair. It's virtually impossible. And so adding these new entrances, adding these ADA paths is going to make it much better for everyone. And I want to give Dave a shout out here, because when we do have programs like our Community Heroes programs, and we have to make sure that the people we're honoring, including Miss Carrie Webster, who had she was 94 years old at the time, and
are trying to honor her at an event that is up the hill, you know, we have to rely on the parks team to help us, you know, bring members of the community up the hill. So that is, you know, a shame. The park should be more accessible, and we're really excited that these improvements are going to do that.
So glad to hear it. Thank you, Rosamond. And the fights around parks are certainly always hard, but you know, democracy is occasionally a fist fight.
Yes.
And I think hopefully we ended up someplace good for it. And for those who haven't read the whole of the lawsuit, it was actually the first exploration of case law built around New York State's Environmental Bond Act.
Yes.
The environmental rights that were enshrined in New York State's Constitution several years ago. So silver linings.
And I just have to say, if you read the judge's ruling, it begins with "the tree grows in Brooklyn." So quotes. So it's a really interesting read.
Poetry and legal action.
Yes.
Morgan, before going to Deborah, I want to go to you real quickly because Rosamond just talked about some of the important civic and social benefits that the capital process is going to help realize in Fort Greene in the way that it's always been, you know, kind of a town square for the neighborhood, putting my old dusty Fort Greene hat back on for a moment. But wondering if you could talk about some of the different infrastructure benefits that you think of as you build Prospect Park. And those could be climate, those could be health, and I think there have been some big announcements in the last couple of months that you could talk about.
Yes, thank you, Julian. So, you know, we're 585 acres, and 350 of those are natural areas. And in my first year, we experienced one of the worst floods in decades in September of 2023. And literally, actually, just right up down here outside of the picnic house, all of the Long Meadow became a brown river. If it looked like, you know, the Colorado River just transplanted itself right here in Brooklyn. And it was really scary. It was, you know, an uncontrollable amount of water. And part of that is due to climate change, right? We're seeing these bigger, larger rain events, major rain events where there's just a deluge kind of in a matter of minutes, a matter of hours. And our soil is fairly compacted, right? The Long Meadow gets a lot of use. We welcome 10 million visitors a year. So it becomes just a, you know, a water slide. And so I called up DEP after that storm and I said, hey guys, you gotta take a look at this. I showed them the videos of what the park looked like during that storm. And they said, okay, yeah, this is something we need to look at. Because in general, they're in the business of trying to look at stormwater management. And they have a number of capital investment programs where they can invest in green infrastructure, mostly in the public right of way and in their property, but at times there is a good collaboration with the Parks Department. So through site visits and many conversations, it probably was a year of conversations and studying. They actually brought on an engineering firm and actually did a comprehensive assessment of water flow across the entire park and our drainage system. Olmsted was really a revolutionary in thinking about green infrastructure. Everything across the park is designed to drain into our 60-acre lake. So he was really thoughtful about actually how we could manage water across the entire park, but he didn't anticipate these major weather events that would happen 150, 170 years later. So, so DEP, fortunately, they got the message. They invested in further research to identify kind of all of the stormwater management flows across the park, our drainage system. And then they came back to me and said, you know what, we're going to make a $50 million investment in stormwater management for Prospect Park, because ultimately they see, of course, the inherent benefits for the park itself, but most importantly for the residents surrounding the park, especially in the southeast corner where there's been chronic flooding for residences for years. So that was really helpful. You always, when working with the city, it's really important to have your data to back up your advocacy and to show the real impact of what this investment will help improve. So we've been very fortunate to then, you know, be able to have this investment, this commitment from the city, from DEP, to be able to help build what we're calling blue belts in 3 sections across the park. So again, thinking about climate change, and many people know we also experienced a 2-acre fire in the ravine just to the right of us here. So we're really thinking about climate change. Fortunately, our 350 acres of natural areas and our 30,000 trees are part of the solution. You know, all of the environmental benefits that those trees provide help to mitigate the impacts of climate change, but they also are on the front lines of vulnerability for when these kind of climate events happen. So we're thinking about the dual role and the ways we need to be prepared, because it's not a matter of if, but when the next kind of climate impact will happen.
Thank you, Morgan. I think those are amazing examples of how the benefits of parks extend well beyond borders in ways that we neither fund, let alone recognize half the time. And even though Prospect Park is big and the only forest left in Brooklyn, lots of those floodwater, stormwater mitigation benefits, the health benefits are unlocked by green spaces of all size and parks and open spaces of all size across the borough. And I did actually, I was in the park the night of the fire and came across it on a run, and it was the most terrifying, surreal thing I've ever seen in Brooklyn. But neither here nor there. So thanks for that. Deborah, I want to turn to you now. So you serve an important, influential role as chair of Community Board 16's Parks Committee. Wonder if you can talk a little bit more about how you advocate for investments in parks and open spaces in your district, the different benefits they provide, what folks in the community have asked for, and then since Commissioner Marr mentioned it just before this, wondering if you could talk a little bit about the statement of district needs that you put together and what role that plays.
Yes, okay. Hi, I'm Deborah Williams, and I've been advocating for our parks for quite some time. We want more activities in our parks. We want, more investments. What's that question?
Benefits.
Oh, the benefits is the health. Our seniors could come out. Right now, we have 3 parks that the bathrooms are not working. Now, if you have no working bathrooms, then our children, our seniors, we can't enjoy our parks, right? Just like Ms. Morgan was talking about the BRC. That too is like on a standstill right now, but I think it's on the way, right? Right, it's coming on. And we just need the investment to trickle down to our communities too. Our public health and our wellness, these parks have us go out and exercise. We have different strategies that we have events in the park and stuff like that, which is real good for the open space in my community. We just want to ensure that residents' lives, within walking distance of our parks are safe. That's the main thing too, our safety of our parks and the greenness of our parks. Because we don't have, in our community, we don't have many green space, like open green spaces. So these parks that we have, is really, really a wellness thing with us. We have like I talk a lot, I go to the meetings, I participate with Park for Partnerships. I had an event a couple of years ago in Marion Street Park. I had a music festival, and people didn't even know that park, and I live right across the street from it. So people come from all other parks and come to there because my neighbors, they get involved, they close up the park, which we asked the park department if we could do that as a block association, and we did that. And now the park is really flourishing. They have yoga in the park, so I'm just advocating for more investment in my community. We want better lives and healthier choices too.
No, that's all incredibly important, and you raised some great points about how community boards can raise awareness of how to work with parks, how you can be the bridge between communities and the Parks Department. I hope you can say a little bit more about the statement of needs that you guys put together.
Okay, the statement of needs, district needs. What we do is we have a couple of committees, okay, of all of the district, like the physical, the parks and housing and stuff like that. So we have a couple of committees, and we all get together and we get their needs, their wants, what they want to see change, what they don't want to see change, and they make up a district needs. And we get from our district manager the amount of money that could be spent or whatever, and they get it together, and then we send it to we send it off for our budget. Okay. And then we come back. But a lot of times when we have our district needs and it comes back, it's a lot of times says not funded for this, not funded for that. And I'm sure other community boards has the same problem too. But we have, like, you know, when you say district needs, these are what our district needs. This is not something that, you know, we just making up. These are what we go out, we look at the parks, we look at our housing, we look at sanitation, we have transportation. Right now they're doing over in part of our community, Sandy Nurse District, you know, Broadway Junction. But I went up in Broadway Junction and there is birds and pigeons all over in there. So I don't know, you know, so I'm trying to advocate, I'm trying to get, you know, the voice out. So thank you.
Doing all you can do is do what you can, and
All
I think
I
we
can do
heard.
is
I
what
think
I
we heard
can.
that Parks wants to, you know, Parks would love to fund all the things.
Yes,
but,
I know.
But it might be a longer process of, you know, making sure that document can be an inspiration over the long term. And you know, just on that note, maybe I'll switch the order a little bit. And Rosamond and Morgan, wondering if you both can talk a little bit about how you work with community boards, both at Prospect Park and at Fort Greene Park, and what role their partnership plays in the work you do.
Sure. Our community board is CB2, and you know, we work in a number of ways. Number one, we just make sure we're at meetings. You know, we're obviously a regular presence at the parks meeting, but also other committees. You know, whether it's the youth committee or the general meetings, or a meeting I like to attend quite often these days is the land use meetings, because that's really where a lot of things happen that affect the park. So we have to be present, but I think there are a number of other ways that we work. You know, we actually host a CB2's health fair in Fort Greene Park every year, so we collaborate on that, and that's an opportunity to really engage more deeply. We also lately have been fostering a connection, and I was actually speaking with CB 14 and 9 about this over here. Woohoo! Shout out to the table. We're trying to get a connection between our Green Team program, which is a paid environmental education program for young teens in the neighborhood, and over 50% of the cohort every year is from Whitman and Ingersoll and Farragut houses. And so we're trying to foster this connection where the teens, as they're moving through the program, as they go from sort of their core year to becoming a guide or a senior guide, that they're having more civic opportunities, including presenting and engaging with community board members at meetings. So we have these joint meetings between the youth committee and the parks committee, and you know, they talk, they present, they engage. And what we're hoping, you know, they keep getting invited to become public members, and we're hoping that some of them will take the board up on this, and that there will be a little bit more of a pipeline into the community board from the membership of Green Team.
Talk about democracy in action. Love it. Morgan, over to you.
Yeah, I'll just add that, as I said before, as part of our capital design process, we make a point to go to every, of local community boards to present. We get feedback, meaningful feedback on our design process. Again, we're ultimately focused on designing for our end users, how they use the space. And then we also are fortunate to have representatives from the community boards on our community committee. So the community committee is a kind of governing body that helps to guide a lot of our work. A lot of program coordination happens with the community committee and the other kind of civic groups who have a stake in the park. So they have a seat at the table there as well.
So important to build local voice into both, the capital process, but also programming. Rosamond, like you mentioned earlier, about making sure that what you do is informed by what the community needs to get to the things you're doing in the park, and we're going to how to shape the programming. Deborah, back to you real quickly. Wondering if you can talk a little bit more in depth about an idea that you took from idea to reality for your communities as part of the work on the community board. I know we talked about a couple of things on our call, but now I think we talked about rain gardens, we talked about fitness.
Okay.
So we'd love to hear more about that.
Okay, what I do with my committee, I do talk about what's happening because we have transportation, sanitation, and housing, all in one group. So with me, I tried to tell them to, with the rain gardens, because we got a lot of rain gardens that came up, and they're beautiful. Once they start, now it's spring, they come, but the trash, so we, foster a relationship with sanitation, and if we see them clogged up or anything, they will come and clean it out. And then I try to get my neighbors, I go up and down my block, I go in another block, even the merchants that's on Rockaway Avenue, I show my face, I tell them, clean up in front of their, place or business. And so it's very important to be seen and heard too.
No, and I think that applies to anyone who's moving through this process. Is just like Rosamond mentioned, if you show up to meetings continually, even on the city side, they might ask you to do something. So
yes, that's what I always try.
You never know when the opportunity to step up is going
to say in my meetings too. A quorum is so important for the community, because a lot of people come and say, well, we can't get this done. Okay, but did you come to the meeting? Did you, have a voice? Did you have any input? And in order for us to have anything going on, you have to be there.
And thank you all for being here today.
Yes.
Again. So Morgan and Rosamond, I'm going to turn to you and maybe shifting gears to think about the funding side and the resources that you mobilize. What kind of strategies are you both exploring for finding new money for capital improvements, for maintenance? Morgan, you talked about the climate money that DEP brought in for rainwater. So thinking about what are some of the new ways that you're exploring how to reshape the capital process?
Yeah, so we are, again, very lucky that we have an in-house capital team, a design and construction team. And we have a very large spreadsheet where we've inventoried all of the assets across the park, so all of the buildings, all of the paths, the benches, lighting, and we have a list of all of the unfunded needs. And every year, and we have a criteria, so, we have columns in the spreadsheet that show how we evaluate the need. And as the commissioner said, we try to go with, the thing that's been unfunded or is in most need of repair first. But we are hoping to translate that into a really comprehensive 10-year capital plan. And again, we have the luxury of staff who are capable of doing this and, know the park inside and out. And I think that's going to be, I hope, a compelling proposal to bring to the city to say, look, we know all of the areas that still need to be restored. Over our 40-year history, we've accomplished, so much. The park you see today is because of the work of our capital team, but there's still so much more that we can be doing. And then if funded properly, here's this 10-year plan where we know each year how we're going to address various aspects of our infrastructure. Then, the city dollars get stretched farther. It's, very much thoughtful about kind of how we're working in areas of greatest need first. So we're very in the early stages of having that conversation with Parks and with the mayor's office. So I'm hopeful that, that more long-range planning, and as the commissioner said, it's unfortunate that there isn't just, the dollars waiting when kind of each piece of play equipment is expired or, this section of path work is really deteriorated, that it should just be planned for. Each year we know the projects that need to be restored. So we're hoping to get ahead of that with that plan.
Some great ways of looking for, or making a bigger, louder tin cup, perhaps. So Rosamond, wondering if you can talk about some of the non-city resources you guys are looking to draw upon. I think this will come up in some of the other panels, but maybe do a little teaser.
Sure, and just to begin, from a philanthropic side, we are really trying to draw on the fact that we are a environmental organization, but we're also a cultural organization. We're also a community organization. So really finding the sort of intersections in our work and making sure that we are, pitching what we do in the best way possible to foundations and also to the large number of individuals in the Fort Greene community that contribute to us. But I want to build on a little bit of what both Hunter and Lacey mentioned in the prior panel about the growth of downtown Brooklyn and how that impacts Fort Greene Park. Working Park is directly next to downtown Brooklyn. Some of you may remember that in 2004, downtown Brooklyn was rezoned. At the time, it was meant to be a rezoning that would encourage more commercial and mixed use. But what has really happened is that most of the developers chose to do residential, right? And most of that residential that was chosen to do was also not affordable. And so what we have now, many, many decades later, is we have 35,000 units of housing that have come online. At least now they're starting to include affordability more, but 35,000 units of housing. And the open space that was negotiated at the time of the rezoning, when they anticipated only 979 units of housing. So that's what was planned for, 979, not 35,000. So what we got out of that rezoning in terms of open space is one new 1 acre park, plaza, Abolitionist Place. So that is just not sufficient. It's totally inadequate. It's not sustainable. So what we're trying to do is bring up that point everywhere we can. And there's a lot of spot rezonings that are happening right now in the downtown Brooklyn area. And thankfully, as mentioned, they are bringing a lot more affordability, including the one that was just approved by council at 395 Flatbush Extension. But what we're doing is, our approach is, we just have to be very engaged in land use now. So, we were organizing for the community board, for the borough president's hearings, engaging with all of our elected officials, going to the city planning commission, and showing up big at council, making sure that relationship with our council member is strong and they understand the needs. So, I'm happy to share that we got a big win out of the 395 Flatbush project that council just approved. So, we got, the win is in a few parts. The first thing is that we got substantial contribution to maintenance and operations of Fort Greene Park, which is huge, because it is so hard to keep the park in good condition and looking green, given the amount of use it gets. Number two, we got a commitment that city planning would initiate an update to the urban planning framework, looking at open space and looking at where do we need the capital improvements. So we know it can't all be, a focus on maintenance. We need a lot of capital improvements in the area, including the city needs to look for new open spaces. So that's a big deal. And right now we're talking with the borough president's office, with city planning, as council member, about how to really get that effort off the ground and make sure the community is very involved.
And in a perfect world, we'd be intentional about how we manage growth and impacts on infrastructure. But I think we're moving towards it. And just for a quick kind of last words question before we go over to audience Q&A, if you could all offer 1 to 3 sentences reflecting on at the start of this new mayoral administration, what should advocacy prioritize, and how would you like to see our mayor and his administration think about investments in our infrastructure and neighborhoods?
I would like to see more investment in our communities, in our schools, our parks, our health care, residents' input, engagement. I would like to see partnerships that we've been fostering in our community to continue, because when people are involved, parks are used. And just investment, because parks are more than green spaces. They are foundation of thriving communities. And I just want all the communities to be thriving and successful.
Thank you, Deborah.
Yeah, I think that we just really need, as a community here, this room collectively, we need to forcefully demand that park investments keep pace with housing production. It's really, really essential. We know the number one priority is housing, so let's embrace it. Let's connect to it, and let's demand that happens.
So joining hopefully affordability and livability.
Exactly.
Morgan, over to you.
Yeah, the mayor was very clear about his 3 core priorities: housing, free, reliable buses, and universal childcare. And parks have a connection to all three. As Rosamund just said, if you're going to build housing, you've got to think about really what the experience of residents living there. And parks are these incredible places where people can find a sense of community. With transportation, you heard earlier from Hunter, the parks are conduits for commutes, right? They can be a meaningful contribution to reducing commuter times. Of course, more environmentally friendly commuting. So they have a role to play in achieving this really incredible agenda for transit. And then, I joke, it's what's the original universal childcare? Our playgrounds, right? So I think that parks have a huge role to play in the vision the mayor has for an affordable city where all New Yorkers feel this is the place that they can raise their family, they can stay, that they're not, driven away by an affordability crisis. And parks, I think, are a really meaningful contributor to that. So 1% for parks at minimum, and as discussed, right, we've got to really decrease this disparity between capital, where we're just rebuilding things, versus having enough expense dollars every year to maintain things, to maintain these assets through their useful life.
Thank you so much, all three of you. I think it only underlines the thread recurring through all of this, that making the connections between parks and open spaces and other parts of city life are so important. So now it's all your turn. So would love any folks who have questions, raise your hand. We'll get a mic over to you. And I think we're running a little late, but I think we still have 10 or 15 minutes. So anybody.
So thank you again for the second panel. Also very exciting, interesting knowledge. So Carl Henry Cesar, CB14, haven't changed. Nerd question warning. So because of the
Warning
tenure,
accepted.
Fantastic. Okay. So the first question is, given the 10-year capital plan that you're thinking of, does this mean that you are depreciating the asset straight line along the 10-year window or longer? And then the second one is, when you mentioned the debt service, I think there's two classes of bonds, right? There's one that's general, and then there's one like specific. So if I'm correct, does this mean the debt service is like bond specific for, I guess, like park capital stuff? So I gave a nerd warning alert. I see eyes glazing over. And so that's it. Yeah. What's the depreciation for the assets? And then I guess what's the funding vehicle given the debt service that was mentioned for, financing these parks projects?
Presumably this is a question for Morgan, but maybe does James Snow still work for the Alliance? Or?
I wish you were here. So yeah, like I said, we're just in the early stages, but yes, we have a kind of formula for depreciation for our capital assets. It varies on the asset itself, so it's not a straight formula for each type. So a playground is different than this building that we're in here today. And then in terms of the question around the bonds, I think that's kind of over my pay grade in terms of how OMB perceives that. Or Commissioner, you have something to say?
Sure.
Public Finance Nerd Gold Star awarded.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a nerd. I've just been doing it too long. So the capital budget, as he mentioned earlier, is bond-based. It's not tax-based. So when you see the city budget come out, the preponderance of that is paying debt service. And unfortunately, it's not separate for parks. It's the overall highways and bridges and schools and so on. The capital budget is based against those bonds, and the debt service, we're still paying stuff from 30 years ago and so on and so forth. But that's our way of getting capital projects done. And then, since I have the mic anyway, when you want something for your group, an improvement or whatever, you want to make sure that the community board is on board with the same thing, and that the elected official is on board, and that Parks is on board. Because if you're asking for one thing, and the elected official is asking for something else, and the community board's asking for a third, no bureaucrat wants to go near that. You want everybody to sort of be united. And if there's budget consultations, as you talked about earlier, every year, and they come up with a list of needs. And we also give each community board what our top 5 or 10 needs are in their community board. If there's something that's not on that list, we can work with the community board and get an estimate of what playground X costs or whatever. So it's really important that everybody's talking together so that you're approaching with one voice.
Long-term infrastructure, long-term financing, long-term vision. Okay, we've got a hand in the back. If we can head on over that way. Just a reminder, tell us who you are and where you come from.
My name is Chris Bay. I'm on the advisory board of the statewide New York Outdoor Recreation Coalition. I'm a resident of Brooklyn, but most of that work is at the state level. So the reason my question really is about, I've been going up to Albany and doing this work since 2021, and I noticed that at the state level, they usually get what they ask for. They have a lot of advocates in the state legislature that vote, and the budget, almost always they get what they ask for, even some of the advocacy organizations. But we have very few state parks in the 5 boroughs. And not a whole lot of DEC managed or OPRHP, managed lands. So my question is, I know 2 of you come from parks, one the park that we're in now, and the other one Fort Greene Park, but they're not state parks. Have you ever been able to access some state funding to be able to do what you do, especially, given what's going on right now with the city budget? We may not get everything we want, right? And we may even have, not as much to work with as we had in the last budget cycle. So is there any chance that we can fill the gap with some state funding and things like, I don't want to get too nerdy, but like the EPF's municipal park program budget line and some other budget lines that are in there that most likely are going to be fully funded?
Sounds like we should be talking to you about this, but Morgan and Rosemary.
It's a great question. Thank you so much for asking that. So a couple of ways to respond. So yes, you're right. There are ample opportunities to lobby in Albany, and the state budget's about to come out. It's supposed to come out April 1st. I think it's going to be late. But I encourage you, I just taught myself, and Deborah and I went up to Albany a couple of years ago. Literally, you can go to the state capitol. There's a directory in the lobby of every single elected official's office. Just go to their office, introduce yourself, and you can make a case for funding. Not to say that you'll get it that year, but you'll it's designed to be actually incredibly accessible, such that you can go and literally you can stand in the lobby and you will see elected officials and you can start a dialogue and a relationship with them. We are fortunate, so we have a relationship with DEC. Our lake is actually governed by DEC, so they help to provide regulatory guidance over a water quality of our lake. And then we fortunately have some state forestry grants. We've been able to really restore several acres of our woodlands with state forestry funding. So we are grateful for that. And then in addition, we get discretionary items from our local state senators and assembly members for capital.
Yeah, great question. We're not doing that for capital yet, but we will as soon as the capital improvements start moving again. Once we break ground, right, Commissioner Mark? So, but we do get state funding for our programming through DEC. We actually just got a $200,000 grant for our Green Team program that I was mentioning. And that's through their Environmental Justice Division. Fort Greene Park is directly adjacent to what New York State calls disadvantaged communities. So, we are running that program connected to their Environmental Justice Division. And we've been thrilled that that programmatic funding has gone up from 100 to now 200,000. But also NISCA, I mentioned we're an arts organization, so we make sure to take advantage of, unfortunately the federal government is not being so friendly right now, and our National Endowment for the Arts grants have dried up and been rejected, but we do try and make sure we're hitting all the levels, and I love this question. We're definitely going to focus on it in the coming years.
No, I think that's an excellent point to bring up the arts, and I think for a lot of smaller groups, a lot of the times Department of Cultural Affairs funding will be the first expense funding that small nonprofits are eligible for. And after a certain number of years of getting the expense money, you are then eligible to apply for city capital funding for your place. So an important gateway opportunity there. And then I'll just take a moment to plug, since we're talking about state parks, State Assembly Member Bobby Carroll has an incredible proposal out to try and bring the Winter Olympics to New York and Lake Placid. And I think that could be an incredible opportunity to try and mobilize investment all across the city and all across the state in the facilities that will need to accommodate that and make sure that communities benefit from that. I think we have time for one or two more questions. Commissioner Marr, quick interlude.
I just wanted to follow up on the state thing.
Great.
Yeah, so with state funding, we definitely ask on our behalf. So if you're seeking state funding, make sure you're coordinating with parks. There tends to be more limited dollar amounts and limited pools. There's CCAP, which is the member items stuff. Sometimes there's dormitory authority money, historic preservation, arts, and so on. It takes through the state bureaucracy 2 years to get in our budget, so you don't necessarily want to be specific. You want to be broad-based improvement at playground X instead of pavement or play equipment, so that when the other funding comes, it usually has to be coupled with other funding to get that. But it's just important when you're pursuing state funding to coordinate with parks.
Great extra tools in the toolkit, and always tap your Parks Commissioner on the shoulder. Danny, we got a question from you over here. Danny Cunningham, esteemed BPOC steering committee member and chair emeritus of Prospect Parks Comcom.
So I know all of the panels are gonna bring up the issue of advocacy, and most of the people here. What would you suggest to communities that don't have a community committee or a parks conservancy, and how they can help themselves advocate for more parks funding?
Incredible, and that was not a plant, that was de novo.
There's a wonderful organization called Partnerships for Parks. They are designed for just that purpose. They help with basic capacity building for volunteer organizations. They help with understanding how to navigate the city's budget, how to potentially become a 501c3. They also offer mini grants and systems change grants. So that's a wonderful resource, Partnerships for Parks. And each borough has local Partnerships for Parks coordinators. So if you don't know who that is, who covers your part of the borough, you can come to us, or you can talk to Commissioner Marr. And then talking to Commissioner Marr is also a wonderful resource too. Likely he already knows about the issues going on in the park that you're advocating for. So having a good line of communication to the local manager or regional manager, and then ultimately to the commissioner's office is a great way to go.
And the community board too.
Community board, yes, thank you.
Yeah, and I just add to that is all very important. I think we also have experienced that it's helpful to just talk to the other stewardship groups that are, in your neighborhood. And, we started collaborating with Friends of Commodore Barry Park, which works with Partnerships for Parks. And we started collaborating on advocacy. One of the first things we did together was actually interviewing all the council members on Parks and Open Space for the election before Crystal was elected. So she sat down with us along with everyone else, and we asked our questions. And by doing so, we were together advocating already through our questions for certain things, right? So that was really important, and we continue that partnership with them in a number of ways. So,
Danny, I think that's exactly what the coalition is here for too. So, hoping that all of you will start to think of us, as an opportunity, a place to triage questions that you might have, models that you want to explore, and hopefully we can work together to figure out an answer there. And also want to acknowledge that Tim Tompkins, who's going to moderate the next panel, is the inaugural director of Partnerships for Parks. So we've got legends in the room. So on that note, I'm going to ask you all to thank our panelists in a second. Are you all ready to accept a very important challenge? Okay, affirmative, yes. So we're running a little behind. I'm going to ask that we take a 2 minutes, 120 seconds to stretch, grab water. Hopefully folks have been taking bathroom breaks as they need to, but we want to make sure that we're respectful of everybody's time and the panelists' time, so we're going to move pretty quickly into the next panel after a quick stage reset. So back in your seats in 2 minutes, and now join me in thanking our panelists. And thank you all for your questions.
I have a quick question for you.
Just a note too, for those that are in the back, there are plenty of seats at the table. If you want to move up, you want to be closer to the action.
After I have approval.
And now I'll invite Tim and his panelists up to the table to do their quick little reset.
Okay, yeah, that project.
Yeah, no.
I don't have a problem with
I
it.
just know rather than me asking you the questions, I don't want to put it in writing.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, understand.
I'd rather have it.
Yeah, well, once I get, April 9th, I'm presenting to CBA full board. Once I get there okay, I'll ask the mayor's office if it's okay, and if it's all right, I'll just go through the whole
I wonder
presentation.
maybe we could do Prospect Park Alliance and the garden at the same time, just so that we could get all questions.
I could do it.
No, just save you time.
It's all good.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah, as long as the mayor's office is okay with it, then I'm
Do
okay.
you think you're going to get CBA approval?
Yes,
Yeah, 100%.
it was their dream and mine from way back when.
Okay. All right. So I'll bother you in a minute.
Cool.
Hello, gentlemen. Hi, I'm Clayton Lawson.
Hi, Clayton.
Do you know the Narrows Botanical Gardens?
All too well.
Oh, great. I've been documenting it from the very beginning. I moved into that neighborhood in the 1980s, early 80s, when it was a dump.
Yeah.
You know, that's part of Shore Road Parks. And it was a dump for 50 years.
Know it very well.
It was, and so, Jimmy and Richie and
Know
all.
Jimmy well.
Okay, I've documented, I've done videos for 30 years about the park. I have a whole lot of stuff that I would love to get involved in showing to a bigger community. We showed it on Facebook page, on Instagram, or something like that. I'm wondering if there's some way to...
Folks, in case you thought I wasn't keeping a timer, I'm going to ask that everybody head over to their seats so that we can get started with the next section. Thank you.
Other parks.
So I think what you want to do is go through Community Board 10, make a proposal to them, and then they can make a proposal to us.
Here, my card.
Thanks.
And I on YouTube I have that's a whole lot of videos, but at the top, the first 12 are mostly about MBG.
Very cool.
I just did one. I thought I was going to be able to show it here, but there's no video production here.
Okay.
Our new sensory garden. We got
Got
a
it.
grant for it.
Very cool.
But I'm really hoping that I can get in touch with other parks to see if they have people like me that have done videos or had a collection, an archive. Just put together a huge archive for Jimmy.
Talk to CB10 first, and then we'll see. We'll see what we can do. I'll talk to our press office about it and see how they feel about
Yeah,
it.
one of the things, so many groups do movies in the parks. I could do short little videos that promote all the parks. And if they
All right,
require,
folks, don't
they have
make
to
me
get a
regret
permit
giving you
to
a
show
break,
these movies.
please.
You have to show a couple of our little promos.
So as folks are
You
coming
need to get a
back to the
permit for that
table,
kind of thing, and you need to take
you'll
a breath
see that
mint, too.
I handed out a card that said, please write, and just write on your cards one sentence or phrase, just one sentence or phrase of one thing that government or others could do to make it easier to raise funds. So I handed out a bunch of index cards. We won't get to everybody, but at the top of the session, I want to ask 3 or 4 people not to
You're doing great.
explain the whole thing, but just literally, if you can right now, just take a moment while we're doing the intros to write one sentence or phrase of one thing that from your point of view, government or others could do to make it easier to raise funds.
After this session, I'm going to head out.
And then we're going to nudge the people in the back in the coffee clutch back to tables.
If you
All
can
right.
hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, please go back to your seats.
Great. And again, just go with the prompt on this. We'll ask a few people right at the top of the session, what's the one thing, just to read what you wrote on your card. Please write it down. We don't have time for people to sort of talk through it. So write down one thing. I'm Tim Tompkins. I'm a lover of parks and open space. I played a role in founding Partnerships for Parks. I ran the Times Square Business Improvement District, and I now do work at NYU and also with organizations like the Center for an Urban Future about how to strengthen and support public-private partnerships, particularly related to public space.
It's a thrill to be here with a bunch of really, really smart people. I also am with a bunch of passionate people right here out here. Just wanted to get a quick sense of who's in the room. So, who here, and you know, if you're an individual but you're with an organization, you know, just go with your gut about what makes sense. Who here is working primarily on a space that's a New York City park? Or their organization? If that organization, is it a traditional park or raise your hand if it's like a greenway or waterfront. Okay, you have some others, great, greenway waterfront. Who's with a government agency? All right, okay, great, good. Who's with like a recreation center, athletic field, and it could be that you're using in your user group that's advocating, you don't have to be a full-on partner, great, okay. Recreation center, okay, anybody with a bid? Okay, a few bids and bids hoping to be, right, okay. And what about just like a neighborhood group that does programming of non-park space, like streets or plazas? All right, we've got a cluster back there, great, okay. And then for those groups that are ongoing partners and caring or actively programming for a park development space, just to know, and this is not a contest because we all know that raising $500 for your block association to improve that public space can be as tough, with all due respect to Morgan, as raising $500,000 for Prospect Park. So just to get a sense of what people, how many people as part of an organization for parks or public space related activities raise more than $50,000 a year? Just raise your hands. Okay, lower your hands. How about between $25,000 and $50,000 a year? Okay, how about between $10,000 and $25,000? Okay, how about between $5,000 and $10,000? And how about less than $5,000? Okay, so that just gives us a sense of like who's in the room and doing which kind of things. And then one more set of questions. How many of you raise money from individuals, like members, members of your group? Raise your hand. Okay, big chunk of that. How many from local businesses? Okay. How many from government? And how many from like philanthropic grants? Okay, so a real mix there. Okay, thank you very much. So for those, we're just going to do, right now we're going to do just 4 or 5. Who's written just down a sentence on their index card? Okay, so I'm just going to pick like 5. We'll go back and do more later. Person in the green and blue here. You want to just stand up and just read your one thing.
Sure. So I'm theme dressed for Green Park. Could we rightfully?
Sorry, we'll get you a mic here.
Thank you. Hi, Haley Bornberg, Friends of Mount Prospect Park. Glad to be here. And I wrote down, can we rightfully glorify maintenance and champion good conditions and maybe even ribbon cut for maintenance and celebrate it?
Love it, love it, love it. Okay, another person who has just a sentence in the back here on the black.
Thank you. My name is Ben Tucker. My suggestion is simplifying the application process and opening up eligibility.
Application process for
funding applications,
right?
City portals and stuff.
Right. Less paperwork for getting money. There was somebody else in the back. Katie? Okay, okay. Yeah, so read 3 or 4, yeah.
Okay, 2 of them say, 2 of them are tax the rich. Let's see, we have reform the capital process to decrease its timeline.
I thought you were going to say reform capitalism, but that too.
Yeah. No, same. Let's see, keep the funds raised in parks to stay in parks. Yep. Better coordination between agencies. Ooh, harness real estate revenue. And last but not least, that's it.
Anybody over here? Just one over here. Stand up.
Funds for paid parking, like have more paid parking, and for those funds to be transmitted to parks.
Great.
That's a great. I think we should collect all of these cards.
Yeah, let's collect them, and actually we don't need to do anything now because they came up with all the solutions. But okay, so thank you. Wait, we got one in the back. If somebody wants to say, did you raising your hand?
Really working me out here, Tim.
Yeah, you're getting your calories in.
Hi, I'm Desiree from Friends of Amherstburg Park. Why not have a lotto? I mean, it worked for the school systems.
Yeah, right. Okay, so amazing ideas, and now we're going to jump to folks who are doing this different kinds of things every day. And so what I'd like to do is we'll just go down and I'll ask you to introduce yourselves and just an initial round of insights and thoughts from your experiences that you think might be useful to people about how to be more effective. Initially, just how to be more effective within the current constraints of raising resources and money, and then we'll get to some fantasy land a little bit, our fantasies a little later.
Great. My name is Dwayne Kennan. I'm the chairman of the Friends of Brownsville Parks. My team led the effort to get Betsy Head $30 million. So I'm really proud about that. And we take being an anchor park seriously. So to really talk about, fundraising and what it takes to be successful, it's really two things, having a real solid network of folks that can share information with you, and then at the same time, develop your partnerships, because you cannot do it alone. So directly and indirectly, our $30 million park is connected to over $2.1 billion worth of capital funded projects in our community that connects parks to schools, to new housing, and we work with all of those individuals to make sure that they keep their eyes on the prize and that they're aware of what we're doing, and that even though we have all of this funding for capital, it's more important to raise funds around operations to take care of the kids and families in the community.
So I'm going to definitely come back to some of those themes, networks and partnerships, which sounds like related to advocacy and collective power, but also a variety of different sources. So we'll come back to that in a minute.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anna Traverso-Cortzai. It's really great to be here in this room with so many of you. It's really nice to see faces of friends and colleagues. So I kind of wear two hats. I used to work at the Highline in a program, working for a program called the Highline Network. It was a national initiative working with park leaders from across North America, really. So I had the privilege of just gaining a lot of insights in terms of really good best practices out there for all sorts of different things, for projects that were in the business of converting former special transportation infrastructure into public spaces. And now I currently work in corporate philanthropy. I work for Con Edison. I am the program officer of the Adaptation and Mitigation to Extreme Weather portfolio within or the strategic partnerships / corporate affairs world of Con Ed. So many of you in the room are grantees, so it's really great to see you here. To answer your question, I would like to, your question makes me think of two big issues. The first one is really understand if you're already a constituted organization, really looking at your public-private partnership agreement to really understand, where are the areas that where it will make sense to you to devote time, money, resources, fundraising, or raising the attention that your organization, your public space needs for further funding. Really understand, so that you can be very strategic with how you approach the work that it requires for fundraising. And the other thing that I think, no matter if you are a starting organization or group of volunteers, or if you're already a fully fledged nonprofit doing this work, I think a piece of the puzzle that I think is very inspirational and can really elevate your capacity to do fundraising and create a comprehensive fundraising plan is investing time with a group of leaders or even community advocates that you work with, or that through your day-to-day efforts. And devote time to creating a theory of change that can then inform what you will be advocating or what you will be fundraising for. And then I think that really opens the aperture for things that perhaps are happening in your community that you're not necessarily aware, or that you might not even connect to the efforts of fundraising. And that really kind of, goes into like the thinking of the either current or future programs that your organization might develop to further your fundraising goals. So I'll keep it there.
Thank you, and I'll circle back to unpack a little bit that phrase theory of change.
Hi, I'm Susan Scherer. I am here also a little bit with two hats. I did serve as the Vice President of Development for Prospect Park Alliance for the last 7.5 years before last May. I was at the Alliance for about a dozen years. And I am now an independent fundraising consultant and have spoken to many of you and have worked with a couple of parks organizations in the last year. So kind of seeing it from like the broader fundraising landscape and parks and open space funding landscape, but also I can speak a little bit to at least where the Alliance over the last 12 years. And one of the things I wanted to say is that I think Dwayne sort of touched upon this with partnerships and your network. It's really all about relationships. Fundraising is all about relationships and building those relationships, whether that's with your elected official or with a neighbor down the street, right? It's all about relationships. And I think that one of the things that's really important for any organization, whether you are, a larger organization, you actually have some staff, or if you're primarily volunteer driven, I think one thing that's really important when you're thinking about where to spend your time with regard to fundraising is what is going to give you your best ROI. And what is really going to be your best bet for bringing in, frankly, the most money with the least effort, right? You have a million other things to do. I know so many parks organizations, like I said, have a handful of staff, don't have anyone dedicated to fundraising, may not even have staff at all. And so it's really important to think about what are you spending your time on? And I was thinking a little bit about the gentleman in the back's question about state funding, and just wanted to give a little anecdote. We used to have a lot of conversations about that because we really started, you have to think about what's the threshold that is acceptable to do the immense amount of paperwork that it takes. And for a certain amount of money, that's going to be worth it. But probably for, a 4-figure grant or maybe even a 5-figure grant is your time spent, better spent somewhere else. So I think those are the two things to really just, I think are very broad, but really important is really think about where you're spending your time and really work on relationship development.
Great.
Yeah. Let alone a federal grant, like state, federal, like.
So thank you for pulling out the theme of relationships, which I was going to circle back to. I also, part of our blue sky thinking is going to be talk about what can get you the most amount of money for the least amount of effort. We're going to talk about our question of how can we make it less effortful? Not necessarily us, but particularly sort of helping government make it easier or other folks. Dwayne, could you talk a little bit more about sort of networks and partnerships, and in your mind, sort of what are kind of the different components of both those words that relate to some of the things that you think are useful for people to think about?
Okay, so supporting what Susan mentioned, the networks and partnerships is really about relationships. If you're connected in a way that you're sitting next to someone that has access to funding and they get to know you and they understand and trust you.
Just to keep a little.
Yeah, they trust you. They'll be more likely to either fund you or point you in a direction of funding that's appropriate for your particular size and scope. For us, what we've had in our community is we've been blessed with a lot of folks who've done fundraising and high-level community work in other places around the country, who are from the community, and all of these professionals came back home, myself included. So we know the community very well, we know the data, we respond to what the needs are in the community and develop all of the things that we're mentioning here, the theory of change. With AI now, it becomes easier to have more templates available for every category of fundraising that you want to go after. So if you build kind of like your master plan that has the typical categories of, what are you doing for families, what are you doing for kids, what are you doing for health, what are you doing around technology? We have spreadsheets and master plans for all of those areas. And then we're prepared based on our networks to look at, when are the timelines for grant submissions, funding support coming each year. It's plotted out. And then we stay aggressive and we stay proactive. And with the proactive approach, 9 times out of 10, at least we're seriously considered for the funding or maybe considered in the future. But having, that master plan philosophy that's connected to a group of folks that are your partners and your collaborators, that will generate the best success for you.
And part of what correct me if I'm wrong, but part of what I heard in that I think relates a little bit to the theory of change is you said, not just about like, I'm fundraising for parks or open spaces, I'm fundraising for kids, for health, for like, what's the actual outcome? Why does this matter? And depending on the nature of the funder and their interest, expressing it in a way that it's like, this isn't about, sometimes it's about environmental restoration, but sometimes it's also about some other societal good, and that is represented by a network or group of people who are using the park or are part of your partners. So is that getting a little closer to like this theory of change idea?
Yeah, one thing that I would also add to what Dane was saying, it takes time to sort of map all these things out, like understanding when the deadlines are open for different sources of funding, and also trying to have a diversified pool of money for your fundraising efforts. Government is certainly important. No park would, I think, subsist without some sort of public support in a substantive capacity. But it's not the only one. There's individuals, there's corporate institutions that can aid in those efforts. And so just trying to understand and having the capacity to build relationships and get to know your electeds or like all the stakeholders that are part of that funding ecosystem. Going back to your question, can you repeat your question?
It's about theory of change, just unpacking that.
Oh yeah. So theory of change is it's a tool. It's a way of thinking about your programs. Trying to create a long-term vision. It's very similar to a logic model. I know it gets in sort of in the weeds, but it's a way of you identifying what are the outcomes that you're pursuing, the metrics that those outcomes would support, and also trying to map, your stakeholders that you would be connecting to achieve those metrics, those outputs, to those outcomes, and to that longer-term vision. It's a type of work that, like, if done correctly, if you can, many parks, not so much in New York City, but across the country, are trying to implement to think about the opportunities that they could leverage from that, myriad of a funder, from that, philanthropic sort of pool. And so, going beyond the immediate environmental restoration initiatives that perhaps like you need to pursue to fix whatever issue, how can you connect, the assets that your community brings, whether it's the youth, whether it's, specific, kind of, collective interest or whatever makes your community unique to solutions. And so I want to just briefly mention, a lot of parks across the country thinking about equitable development, trying to leverage housing, trying to leverage maybe sometimes health, as a way of also advocating for funding for programs that could help feed and solve those issues, like thinking big picture beyond the immediate, beyond the operational needs that the park might have. And there are really great examples. Some are applicable to New York City, perhaps not to every single park, but especially to to communities that perhaps are going through big issues like gentrification or displacement or those kinds of or have really bad health conditions, pre-existing conditions. And so I think it just like unleashes opportunities for you to think about, the role, a new way of thinking about the role that you could play as a convener and as an anchor space for your community.
Yeah, I was going to speak to what you were saying about all the things that parks do and all the different ways that you can potentially tell your story to a funder. And that's individuals, that's foundations, that's corporations, right? And I would just say it's a blessing and a curse that there are so many things, because you really do need to kind of think about for an individual or a specific foundation, what is that thing that's going to make them interested? Is it the fact that it is an open space for families? Is it the health element? Is it the natural areas? I also, though, really want to point out how do we highlight the excitement around basic maintenance, right? Like that was, it's very hard to tell that story in some ways, but in some ways it's not, right? Because you can point to a catch basin that is overflowing, or you can point to a hole in the pavement, or you can point to the fact that a tree that fell doesn't get picked up for a week or something like that. So I will say that I think that we need to get creative around how we talk about that. And I actually think when I was at the Alliance, even actually before the pandemic, we had launched a multi-year, very large, comprehensive fundraising campaign. And part of it was just to grow the general operating money that we raised philanthropically every year over the course of a number of years. And the other piece, some of it was capital, which was the Vail, which thankfully was paid for by the city. And then it was the endowment. And we really had to think about, before the pandemic, we had no idea how, we were like, well, everybody thinks the park looks fine. Sometimes the trash isn't picked up, but generally people just don't get it. I think, unfortunately, sometimes you need to highlight the negative to get people to understand that if we don't get that general operating money, if we don't have that maintenance money, you're gonna see trash cans overflowing for 3 days. I'm sorry, but that's what you're gonna see. You're gonna watch catch basins overflow. And so we actually used the pandemic and used, sometimes when cuts were made on the city level, right, to say, this is why we need your support. This is why we need endowment money, is because we need to be able to sustain a certain level of care of the park in general. And I do think that with certain people, that does really resonate. I think that can really resonate with people who are in your space every day. That's what is going to resonate with them. It's true. A foundation is very rarely going to give you money for basic maintenance. There's a lot of program money, corporate volunteer programs, that goes into general operating, but there's not a huge amount of corporate money out there. I'll be really honest. It's not the best, focus, in my opinion. But I think that those people who are in the park every day and who use the park every day, if you get in front of them and start to have conversations with them, people can understand that. But coming back to the larger point was just, you need to start to get to know people, build those relationships to understand what about your space, your park, your mission that they care about, so you can be speaking to them.
I want to add one other thing, that is, the maintenance is the baseline. If it's not well maintained, doesn't feel safe, a park is never going to work. But part of the counterpoint to that, which also fits into a lot of these other parallel outcomes, is programming. And that's something that in a very limited way, government generally doesn't fund, which is another thing. I also want to say that one other thing that brought out of the pandemic was the Green Fund and a larger level of funding. And I think you all know about sort of that there's different tiers of fund through the City Parks Foundation and through a whole group of generous funders who participate in that. So thanks to them, and I think you guys know about that. So
I do want to just caveat that the best corporate funder has been and always will be Con Ed. And I think that I'm not alone.
Now, who's she sitting next to, and who's So we talked about, like you said, about how to raise money with the least amount of effort. So this gets to another theme that's the beginning of Blue Sky. We're going to get into some completely different, not usually thought of mechanisms for raising money for parks and public spaces in a minute. But first, there's just these processes. And it's no secret that within the Parks Department, there are radically different rules and processes, which sometimes grow out of some logic, but more often it's not anyone's fault here, but it's the result of just at a moment in time, there's an administration or a mayor or a parks commissioner who says, yes, you're a small parks group, you should not have to indemnify the entire city of New York. And then there's another group that has that. So the issue of insurance indemnity, there's different policies. I sometimes joke that the P in PTSD is permit, because you talk to anybody about permits, especially if you're interacting between parks and DOT and PD, and there's different permits. Some places get that if you go down Broadway in Manhattan, Shake Shack, the money from that goes to Madison Square Park. The concessions and commercial activity in Union Square don't go to Union Square Park. Go to Bryant Park, everything goes to Bryant Park. And it's not like an evil conspiracy, it's just that like there are these different rules and there's a need to, and what one often hears is, guess what? We're never giving anybody that deal again. And that comes from Corp Council and risk management and from budget department that's trying to think about the whole city. But the fact is we have all these different things, and then you also have, when you get outside of parks, you have different processes. When I was in Times Square, we managed a public plaza. There was DOT property right next to a parks property. They took a huge leap forward when they said, hey, if you're helping to maintain this and you have some commercial activities, you get to keep the money. That was a huge leap forward. The agreement was a nightmare, but it was a different way. So, and they ask you to reflect on from your experiences and what you've seen, whether it's your own organization or other things, what are some of these process things that could make folks' lives easier? And one other final thing, it's also fundamentally an equity issue. One of the biggest parks organizations, the person who leads it once said, we would not exist if we had to insure and indemnify the city. So what's it like for a block association or a small group when they need to spend 20 or 30% of their annual budget of $10,000 on insurance? It's bullshit.
I mean, I am not the expert at all on this at Prospect Park Alliance. Obviously, speaking to Morgan or Emily Krell, who works for the Alliance in the back, knows more about the events and the special events and permits and things. But I didn't realize until I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, that the Alliance seems very lucky to me to be able to keep the special events permitting revenue and the concessions revenue. That, I mean, it's an agreement with the park, and that's complicated, but I kind of was aghast that there were parks where they have some great vendor or some thing that brings people in, gets people excited about going to the park, and puts a huge amount of wear and tear on the park, and then that money from that thing just goes back, not even to the parks department, but to just the general city fund. I mean, that just feels like, again, I'm not an expert in this area at all, but that just seems like such a no-brainer to me, that
there's legal complexities, but the question is the city expressing an intention? It has to be the mayor saying to Corp Council and the budget department, let's figure out a way to do this.
Yeah. Definitely, absolutely in agreement with that. A few things that I would say, there are certainly precedents in the city of organizations that have been able to leverage the land or their concessions to support their operational needs, like Brooklyn Bridge. You've mentioned Bryant Park. The Highline, the former executive director who was sort of the founder of the Highline, Robert Hammond, he would always say, his biggest regret was not thinking about a value capture mechanism for the Highline. And part of the reason that didn't happen was because it was a very different New York when the Highline was being thought about. People were leaving the city. They were really interested in staying because it was right after it was in the aftermath of 9/11. And so no one was really paying attention to what that could look like or why they would do that. And the reality is, as much money as developers make, the developers that make the most money were the first wave of developers. They're not the new ones, because the new ones now are building off of a lot, higher prices for everything. So their piece of the pie is a lot smaller than the first ones that really cashed a lot. And so, especially for new park spaces or organizations that are trying to create new public spaces, I think they should really take it seriously to figure out if they could leverage the existing, parts of the land that they're managing to secure funding, like Brooklyn Bridge Park did, or like Hudson River, although both are not really city parks, they're state parks. But they did manage to, they used a property in lieu of taxes, which was a mechanism that they established from the state when they were building those spaces. And so, understandably, not all parks get to do that because many of you guys here are already operating in existing parks where the land's already been developed as parkland. So I think then, it begs the question, and I know the idea around concessions has been, percolating across different circles of discussion in the city. And I think, again, that's where I want to go back to the importance of a public-private partnership or your license agreement to see, can you do that? And if the city, the Parks Department is unwilling to do that, just ask why. Do they think that you don't have the financial muscle to do it? Like, what would it require for them to be open to testing this? And here's, I think, something that I've seen happen quite a bit, especially in the outer boroughs, which as a Brooklyn resident, I feel in that bag. A lot of the really, shiny, cool initiatives and even opportunities to test new things have happened traditionally in Manhattan, Bryant Park, Highline, Madison Square, which is fine. But can we bring that, the capacity or the willingness to test new models, to implement new ideas to the outer boroughs as well? Could there be more, of a standard and a willingness to just test it? If it doesn't work, it didn't work, but at least have some sort of legal framework where, both sides can be partners, because at the end of the day, the city cannot do this without you, without us. They cannot run and manage, most of the parks and open spaces. So they need, professional people that can do, maybe not even professional organizations, but people that are willing to devote their time, their resources, their capacity to do fundraising, to build staff eventually, to bring the programs that those communities need and want up to speed. And so, because there's this, mutual need, there should be a willingness to talk about these ideas and set up systems so that these ideas can be tested and then revisit it. If it didn't work, why? And just question it and try to improve it and try to bring the level of that these spaces require of maintenance, of upkeep, of capacity, staff capacity up as well, because at the end of the day, our communities need it as well.
Yeah, I'll be brief. One of the things that I've seen is we talk about processes, and a lot of times that really doesn't matter. And I'll go back to the relationships, because I've been in a room very similar to this where in Brownsville we were talking about the needs, long-term needs of the community. And some folks were told you had to fill out a 30-page application. And one person in the room had a relationship and they nudged someone, and that person stood up and said, this person needs $1 million. And they got it. And they built their project. So a lot of times you just don't know what's going to happen, but as you're developing your strategies, you hold the developers accountable, you hold the city accountable, you check in, you make sure that you're following exactly what they say they need to help you. And I'll piggyback off of Commissioner Marty Marr, where he just said earlier, make sure if you have a community plan that's connected to your community board, that's connected to your stakeholders group, and everybody's on the same page, because it will make more sense for people like him to help you if there's that type of coordination.
And I also just want to be clear that this is not a critique of parks, because when you have all these processes, I was 25 years ago, I was working with Julie Spiegel and your predecessor, Brooklyn. You probably have the same or fewer people managing all the permits in the entire borough, and there are so many more parks and so many more things going on compared to 25 years ago. And but if the city and Corp Council and others don't sort of say, you know what, we're going to trust these groups that have been here for 10 years. Like, we're going to reduce the load so that your team has less people. That can make a difference. I'm going to get to questions from other folks. The other thing I want to say is with respect to innovations. A lot of these things grew up in a fiscal crisis 50 years ago. Federal government was saying, I'm not supporting cities. Sound familiar? The city was in an incredible fiscal crisis. Sound familiar? It's going to get worse. And people just said, I'm going to step up. We're going to be heading into another cycle of that, and that can be a time where there's a lot of innovation, but there also has to be an intention about public-private partnerships that work in different contexts, especially where there's less resources, and that government has to actively match and support things. Why can't it be that it's not just the groups that can raise $500,000 get a better deal because the Corp Council is like, oh, it's a negotiation, they're bringing something to the table, we're going to give them something. 50 people working in Betsy Head Park week in and week out to bring life to the community in that place, whether or not they're raising millions of dollars, is as valuable and needs to be recognized by the city in a financial way in terms of matching or otherwise. One other thing I'll say about innovation, Brooklyn is at the cutting edge. I look at this stuff across the country of something really new, which is using the Business Improvement District mechanism, which raises, by the way, $300 million a year in 77 districts, most of which are actually small commercial corridors. To have that happen for parks in Fort Greene, you're going to hear a little bit more about it in Gowanus, and in North Brooklyn. And the North Brooklyn thing is especially interesting because it's a group of properties. The early stages of exploring that, the Small Business Administration, the Small Business Services, which supports the bid process, doesn't quite get it. They're like, well, these are for commercial districts, your parks, I don't get it. And what we need is people saying, people are wanting to make a contribution, let's make this happen. And that's also looking at things like real estate value capture. Brooklyn Bridge Park, a model for the country, create a park, creates a lot of economic activity. The money from those towers in Brooklyn Ridge Parks supports the park. Legally, it's complicated to do here, but conceptually, we need the city to embrace that. Let's have comments, questions, thoughts.
Hi, I'm Corinne Candelaria. I'm an outdoor educator with Twin Style Tours. And a couple years ago, I got to go to the Olmsted Network Conference, and I was introduced to this idea of the community health needs assessment.
Louder, please, a little louder.
The community health needs assessment, where hospitals can use community benefit funds for parks. Do we see any of that in New York City? I haven't really heard much of it. Is it even a viable option?
I could just speak to the fact that Prospect Park and frankly a lot of community-based organizations in Brooklyn now do get private funding from New York Presbyterian, Brooklyn Methodist Hospital. So I don't know if that speaks exactly to it, but I do big hospital networks, NYU as well, Langone, they actually do have community support money that you can go after, for sure.
I know that in Queens, the Casino Project has a community benefits agreement and a current RFP that's either just went out or is about to be rolled out for ideas. I haven't particularly known of very successful community benefits agreements, but what I can say is that what I have seen be much more successful is when a park organization, even when the park has not been built yet, has to build an equitable development plan. And so there's a few examples across the country where that's happened. The first one was 11th Street Bridge Park in DC. They've already broken ground, I believe, but the park is, you would never think that they're a park because the kinds of programs they're doing, but those programs are really about elevating the needs of their communities and really trying to mitigate displacement that will happen when the park is built as much as possible. But other than that, one particular equitable development plan sparked all sorts of different other equitable development plans across the country, including San Francisco for India Basin. There's one in Buffalo, the River Line, where that happened as well. And then a few other ones that in like Michigan and perhaps in Texas too. That we're sort of trying to learn from DC's example and being implemented. So I think it just like then you have to think of like if I'm a park, what do I have control over? What are the levers that I can utilize? How will I pursue the funding to create like a community land trust, which is what 11th Street Bridge Park did. Again, not all this might not fully apply to New York City. But there are aspects of it that perhaps that might talk to the needs, that might try to capture the needs of that specific community, what the community wants to see reflected in using the potential of that green space as a lever, as a catalyst for that kind of change.
And really quickly, my experience is with community benefits agreements is around the housing developers. As you know, there's so many new buildings, popping up, all over Brooklyn. And what we're able to do is kind of get to those developers early, even with HPD, looking at the language of what the application process looks like and forcing the developers to set up partnerships with the community as they're applying for their particular, grant, for the city, not after. And then to get in and talk about what the needs are, what their responsibilities would be. So with our anchor park, we had a group that was committed to, if we took care of the capital side of the work, they would take care of the operations for you. And when we did that, they reneged, but we tracked them down and forced them to pay them. So those are some of the things that you have to do, even when you have that community benefits package in place. Hold people accountable.
No, and folks familiar with Atlantic Arts know that that's part of the issue with the community benefits agreement, as opposed to some of the kinds of things that Rosamond and others have talked about in terms of like locking in an ongoing funding stream through some other kind of mechanism is key, because sometimes people don't keep that obligation later on. Other questions?
I was just, sorry, before that, I wanted to just add one thing to the question about the community health needs assessment. We've really been leaning into health and wellness in Prospect Park. There's a whole Medicaid waiver called the Secondary Determinants of Health that's being distributed by different nonprofits like Public Health Solutions. A lot of the major hospital systems are leaning into supporting other types of work. So I would say, whether it's Maimonides, NYU Langone, New York Presbyterian, which is about to open a new health center in Bay Ridge. Look into funding opportunities through the hospitals themselves or through organizations like Public Health Solutions to kind of tap into that money for programming and activities in your parks.
And like a situation where, again, Highline gets built, adjacent developers are going to make money, the Fort Greene Park appears in all the ads for the high-rises going up near Fort Greene Park, but whether or not that translates into money. But a hospital, an educational institution, is another institution that is there and is not going anywhere, where there's an argument to be made that like this actually is in your own self-interest, which is okay. So another 5 minutes for questions. We got somebody with a hand up there, and then we'll come to you. And just introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ethan Norville, Vice Chair of Brooklyn Community Board 9. And I was really activated by that phrase when Dwayne mentioned someone simply asking for the $1 million and getting it versus the 30-page application process. Because that is a space that community boards and the people on them operate in constantly. Relationship building versus using official channels and official processes to get things done and get funding allocations. I'm very curious about your thoughts on how we balance that and how we get ideal ROI from relationships, of course, but also more so actual processes and getting what is ideal for our districts from whether it's government officials or from developers and people who are trying to, get through loopholes or may have to also provide things like community benefits and that type of thing? How do we balance relationships and process at the same time to get what's ideal from both players in that process on either side of us?
No, it's a great question. So thank you. One of the things that's helpful is, our meetings like this, where peers across other community boards are sitting in a room and hearing kind of like what other people's success stories and struggles are. If there was a way to have a deeper coordinated conversation on a regular basis so that some groups are not starting from scratch, right? And they're able to hear from more established groups about what they've done so that you don't have to go through, all of the, I would say, the negative things that can happen in a community board. Because even though you're very powerful, community boards are also very limited. So they need support to the broader community so that they can get more information and be connected to this wider network that can have more power. And then when you're with a larger group, that gives you more options, more opportunity, and then more success.
There was another question up here.
Before that,
Oh, sorry.
just a plug for, depending on what kind of organization you are or group, Partnership for Parks or POSP within City Parks Commission are really great resources and groups and networks of people that where you can find your peers and you'll find a community of people that can help you navigate all those big questions.
Okay, hi, my name is Alicia Ray Miller. I had a question for Dwayne. So Anna, you were saying earlier about how so many of the innovative new park spaces happen in Manhattan, and that's where a lot of the energy, a lot of focus is given with government, with partnerships.
But it doesn't mean that it's not happening everywhere.
Yes,
Different.
definitely. So I wanted to ask with that, Dwayne, with being in a big position in parks in Brownsville, if things were limitless, what are your ideas for what would you want to bring? Best case scenario, nothing wrong, nothing in the way to Brownsville.
Another great question. So we actually have a plan for that, but I'll get into that later. But really, the most important thing that we face is crime in our community, unfortunately. So whenever I'm meeting with anyone regarding health for Brownsville, crime comes up first. The sad example, we just did a presentation here yesterday about the $1 million that we put into a teen center with the Boys and Girls Clubs across the street from our anchor park. Thursday night was a Youth of the Year event where you had 6 kids, and they have to go through a really intensive process. Interview, public speaking, they have to show their grades. It's really intense, and they're dressed to the nines on Thursday night. We're all on the 5th floor of their school looking out over Betsy Head Park, which is beautiful, right? We leave the event, come home and turn on the news, and we find out that a 9-year-old was shot in the leg. Just because the weather was nice and he went outside to play. So to answer your question, I would just eliminate crime as a whole, because that's the thing that has been the worst problem in areas like Brownsville and East New York. The realistic piece really is about continuing to build around the anchor park what we call our sports zone, and that's connecting all of the local assets. The Department of Health is across the street, we have multiple schools, we have the high school with the Boys and Girls Club, we have churches, and we have all of these new housing developments in the community. So we organize all of that through sports. So we just want kind of like our impact to just continue to grow based on that model, and then give any community that wants a sport zone and has an interest in parks, to work with us so that it can grow throughout Brooklyn and then nationally as an organization.
Just one more question. Yeah, one more.
Thank you. Garance Frankie Ruta with Friends of Raymond Bush Playground, which is a very small park in central Bed-Stuy. Just think where in Bed-Stuy is as far away from a subway in every direction as you can get, and that's where it is. It is a small park. No one has ever heard of it. It's across the street from me, which is how I got involved. And, you know, as I've gotten deeper and deeper into this process, you know, Bed-Stuy, I'm looking at the assets in the community district. It's got around 33 parks just in CD3. We have more than 40 community gardens. We have 9 different parks with friends groups on them. And just looking at how the community garden networks work versus how the park networks work, and you know, we're sponsored by Partnership for the Parks. I know this is getting long, but just I just wonder if you have thoughts on how these smaller parks can build networks, because we do have an anchor park. There's Herbert von King Park, but this is not an anchor park. It's never going to be an anchor park, and there's a vast network of non-anchor parks that have deep needs, small groups. Curious for your thoughts. Thanks.
So the question is here.
How the smaller, especially when you have a lot of smaller parks, how they can work collectively and, you know, accomplish something collectively that's so much harder when there's a lot of small parks. It's not a bigger flagship park even within the neighborhood.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I would look at it this way. I would advise you not to look at your park as a small park. You know, I would look at, you know, your park as Prospect Park, to be honest, and get the right people in your group to advocate, and then connect with the professionals that can give you the most support in accomplishing whatever goals you want to have. What was nice in Brownsville is that we inspired some leaders like yourself to who are interested in improving their smaller park, and they were able to get resources. One, Van Dyke Playground got about an $8 million increase, smaller park, and then the leadership from that park helped Livonia Park get funding as well. So don't think of your park as a small park, think of it as Prospect Park.
I have a few ideas. You've mapped them, so that's step number 1, understanding like that there's an actual network that could be created based off of these assets. Step number 2 for me would be, you know, do any of those other spaces have stewardship groups or people? If so, could you come together to do that kind of visioning, that sort of big picture visioning? Because once you realize that, you know, maybe from an acreage point of view, like, you know, they're small, but together they might be significant, you know. And so if this network of smaller greener, or you know, these green spaces can come together, you can say, well, you know, we want to advocate, say, for like green infrastructure improvements across these sites, and you know, at least like that's something that Con Edison is looking at. You know, we certainly want to enhance improvements on green infrastructure, so that they can mitigate both extreme heat as well as flooding. And so, but we do look at the aggregate, like we try to, you know, we're a funder of Prospect Park, so, you know, there's like over 500 acres here. But when it comes to sort of those smaller spaces, like the aggregate is certainly a factor that we consider quite a bit. So, but again, I think it's just like now mapping the stakeholders, like who could you work with to do that sort of big picture visioning.
And I think it really goes back to Dwayne's word at the beginning, which is network, and what you're doing right now. This is a huge breakthrough. Applause to everybody here on a Saturday, just like, this is about building a network. And perfect transition into advocacy. After working partnerships for parks, I spent a year on Parks 2001, which was trying to get 1% for parks. 9/11 happened. We never really found out whether some of the commitments we had would be realized. But what we didn't have then that you have now is an incredibly powerful parallel set of public space advocates in bids. There are many, many more bids than there were 25 years ago, and the transportation advocates who are leading the charge on thinking of streets as public spaces. If parks folks, if this room is matched with transportation advocates who care about public spaces and the bid folks who are managing public spaces, and both of those categories of folks have some different funding mechanisms that need to be applied to parks, then that's one of the ways of getting there longer term. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Tim. I couldn't have said it any better than myself. And now to bring us on home, thank you all for your attention and time today. It's been a long morning, but hopefully an inspiring one. We've got one more panel and conversation led by Emily Walker, Senior Manager for External Affairs of the Natural Areas Conservancy and a long friend of the Brooklyn Parks and Open Spaces Coalition. So thank you again to Tim, the rest of our panelists. They're taking a selfie. Let's give another round of applause in the meantime. And I would also like to plug again that if anybody is interested in learning more about the Partnerships for Parks Green Fund that came up, go talk to our friends at the table over there. They'll get you set up with the workshop that's going to start after lunch. So Emily, without further ado, over to you.
Can folks hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much for sticking it out. I know our panel stands between you all and lunch, so we're going to try to keep it breezy and informative. I think we're just waiting on Arlene, our final panelist. I'm going to take the mic this way so you all can hear me better. All right. So just going to wait for Arlene to join us so we can have a full panel. No, you're fine. The icing on the cake. All right, so really excited to be talking to you all about making the most of advocacy. Definitely feels like a through line. I feel like a lot of the panels that preceded ours kind of stole our thunder. So we're gonna do our best to really make it meaningful for you all because we have some really fantastic panelists with us today. I'm Emily Walker. I am the Senior Manager of External Affairs at the Natural Areas Conservancy. It's really a pleasure to be here. Years ago, I worked with Julian and Marlene Panton and Miss Maria Garrett, who couldn't join us today for this panel, unfortunately, and Danny Cunningham. We helped get the Brooklyn Parks and Open Space Coalition started. It's really thrilling to see this conference come together today, so just super excited to be here. I have three amazing panelists who are going to speak to us about advocacy. I'm joined by Katie Denny Horowitz, the Executive Director of the North Brooklyn Parks Alliance. In her personal capacity, she also serves as co-chair of Brooklyn's Community Board 1 Parks Committee. I'm also joined by Andrea Parker, who is filling in for Miss Maria Garrett, so thank you for pinch hitting. Andrea is the Executive Director at the Gowanus Canal Conservancy and is also an instructor at City College. And finally, I'm joined by Miss Arlene Roberts, who is a volunteer member of the Maple Street Community Garden here in Prospect Lefferts Gardens. So we have a range of kind of open space types represented on the panel today. Some of the themes that I've heard emerging so far from the panels that have already taken place, right? Like we have the importance of partnerships and relationships that I think has come through loud and clear across every single panel so far. Community engagement, I think, is a really critical component of successful advocacy. Capacity keeps coming up, like in every sense of the word, whether that's resource constraints, the size and scale of our parks and green spaces and gardens, or our budgets and staff. This idea and tension, I think, of innovation versus kind of keeping up with the needs that we have for the system we have and the assets we have that are maybe kind of crumbling because they're over 100 years old. Intersectional connections beyond just parks, right? I think that's something we've heard a lot about, public health, youth, the environment, things with like stormwater capture, food justice, right? Transit. Advocacy has come up in every conversation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the panelists. And the first question that I have for you all, I would love for you each to start with just an example or a few examples of how advocacy has advanced the work of your respective organizations. Whoever wants to start.
I can start, since I'm right to your right. Good morning, maybe afternoon to everyone. And just to reiterate, the thanks Julian, thanks Morgan, Commissioner Marr, and the organizers, and of course Emily for introing this panel. We've talked a lot about advocacy today, and it's hard to answer that question because it depends on what the issue is and how to address that through different advocacy tactics that I'm sure we'll talk about over the next half hour or so. I mean, I think, my organization, which was founded around the 2005 rezoning, just has a legacy of advocacy. And so some of those touch points throughout that 20+ year history has a lot to do with waterfront planning and waterfront fundraising. And so some of our biggest moments are securing new public space. It's quite different than other organizations that might be advocating for improvements to an existing space. But a lot of our focus, because of that particular historic moment of, I don't want to say a blank slate because there was a lot of parkland existing before, but a moment of transition into intentional creation of new space. And I think that our advocacy in that creation, whether it's new parcels at Bushwick Inlet Park or the Open Streets and Plaza program, and adding this acreage in these moments, however small, referencing the earlier conversation about the impact of such a small, what the impact of a small space can be, those are some of our biggest achievements.
And I think the piece of advocacy that I'd like to speak the most about really is the work that we did around the rezoning in Gowanus. And I think it's, Katie and I have similar types of sites that went through a similar type of change, but at a very different time. So Gowanus was rezoned in 2021, which is about 10 years, 15 years after North Brooklyn, 10 years after downtown Brooklyn, after the High Line. We learned from the mistakes that happened in each of those places where parks were not prioritized enough in the planning process, where we got more residents to move in downtown Brooklyn than was expected. So because we learned that, we fought really hard in the environmental impact statement to make sure we were really counting all the potential residents and arguing for keeping the ratio of parks to place as high as possible. We certainly saw from the High Line that we hadn't gotten enough maintenance funding. So how do we embed the conversation about funding for maintenance in the planning process? And then I think another piece, which we are now, we're in the midst of a bid formation process to take care of the 20 acres of new public space in Gowanus that was really seeded in the rezoning process. But I think another kind of key piece that we learned from watching other advocates across the city is that it is too easy to splinter community advocates and then not actually meet community needs. And so in Gowanus, we were so intentional about working together as a community, that it's not just public space advocates or environmental advocates, it's artists, it's public housing residents, it's affordable housing advocates, it's industrial businesses. We all have needs, and the city can't break us up. So we formed a coalition, Gowanus Neighborhood Coalition for Justice. We fought together for 7 years, and we did not back down. We ended up with $450 million of investment in the Gowanus neighborhood. $200 million of that is for local public housing, which is the actual affordable housing we have in our city, right? So I think that, and I would say there's certainly lots of things in our advocacy that we've learned from that I think you should all learn from in your next steps. We didn't get boat launches, we didn't get public bathrooms. Like there's obviously, but we need to work on each other's shoulders and really build this larger conversation about how we get the benefits that we really deserve.
Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. My name is Arlene Roberts. I'm one of the founding members of Maple Street Community Garden. For those of you who are not familiar, we are on Maple Street between Rogers Avenue and Nostrand Avenue right here in Flatbush, Brooklyn. I've been involved since 2014. I first started as a member of the compost committee where I processed food scraps on the weekend. I migrated to the gardening committee doing a task with watering the gardens, the vegetable beds in the garden. Then I moved on to 2019 when we officially became a Green Thumb licensed garden. I proposed that we launch a fresh food box program in the garden, which I did in 2020, and I managed the program for 5 seasons through 2024. Currently, I serve as the External Affairs Co-Chair here at the garden, building partnerships with outside organizations, which is an integral part to sustaining the garden. I'm also a cohort member of the Cornell University Community Garden Leadership Program. Advocacy has been the backbone of Maple Street Community Garden. We initially started occupying the land transforming the land. It was an abandoned lot, neighbors in a garden, a family moved onto the block, purchased a home, and started clearing up the lot. A family owned the lot, they died intestate. The house burned to the ground, so it was just abandoned. They started moving stuff out, clearing the land. They got a grant from the neighborhood, community neighborhood grant of $3,000 to clear the land. We occupied the land originally as squatters, and then eventually started working towards the city to, at one point we were locked out by owners who claimed that they had owned, the brothers, the McCarty brothers, who claimed they owned the land. But then we started advocating. We went before Community Board 9. There's currently a member of Community Board 9 who serves as co-chair with me, so we have an alliance there, Brandon Pakan. So we have formed alliances. We went before Community Board 9, we went before 71st Precinct to make our case. We had signs and rallies and everything. We had signature petitions going. We went before the Land Use Committee. Eventually, well, the issue went before probate court to determine who are the rightful heirs. We were locked out for a period. The issue went before probate court since the McCarty brothers did not have title to the land. Then eventually the city, we advocated. Mayor Eric Adams, at the time was Borough President Eric Adams, was a regular visitor to the garden. So we formed partnerships, alliances at various levels of government. Borough President Eric Adams, Matthew Eugene when he was council member, his successor, council member Rita Joseph, is a very, very strong supporter of the garden. She comes to all our events, not sending her representative, she shows up in person. So eventually the city bought the land, and in 2019, we became a Green Thumb licensed garden, which was a very significant transition in our history because now we were able to invite members of the public onto the land to host events and do things we could not do before because of liability issues. One other significant marker of advocacy for us, Councilmember Rita Joseph, again, I say she's a vested member of our community. In 2023, she set aside discretionary funds, $350,000 to fund infrastructure in our garden. We are a relatively young garden, and we have water, which if you talk to any community gardener, how they water their beds, pipe-borne water, we have pipe-borne water on the garden side and also a water fountain on the park side. That's a significant milestone which we could not have achieved in such a short space of time without the support of Councilmember Rita Joseph. She has also pledged to now turn the garden, or to make the garden a model for ADA accessibility. So that's going to be our next major upgrade at the garden, so that I heard someone earlier speak about Fort Greene Park and the elders having to wheel, up the hill. In a garden where the ground is uneven and there are roots. We have a willow tree on the park side. So when the city took over, when the city purchased the land, they split the lot into part community garden and part park. So the park side, which is a sliver on the left side, is run like a regular park, open dawn to dusk, whereas the community garden is run by Green Thumb hours. So we have a willow tree on the park side, which if you are in a wheelchair or otherwise mobility restricted, it's very difficult to navigate, and you can't always, the risk of tripping on tree roots is a very real problem. So that's what advocacy has done for the garden.
Thank you so much. I think we have a lot of folks in the audience today who are eager to learn from advocates who've been doing this for a fair amount of time, right? And you all kind of represent different facets of that through your work. I would love for you each to kind of drill down a little bit because you all represent really different kinds of spaces, different communities. So what are some of the organizing strategies that that differ from your perspectives, like Katie, right? You're managing in your organization a network of parks in a community district. Andrea, you're doing a lot of work kind of in streetscapes and more like non-traditional green spaces. Arlene, you're in a community garden and you just walked us through the really rich and recent history of how that garden even came to be. So I would love if you could all give folks a sense of like, what are the different organizing strategies you use to do your advocacy work? What are those touch points like you just mentioned, Arlene, a lot of those connections that you have with your council member? What does that process look like for the volunteers that help manage your space? How often are you engaging? I would love for some kind of like tactical organizing strategies to kind of come out with this one.
So the growing season at Maple Street Community Garden is dictated by Green Thumbs. So we're open from April 1st through October 31st. During that time, we host a series of we do a lot of programming. I do programming in the garden. So after the food box, my focus has been programming. So anytime there is an event in the garden, we invite the local elected officials. Councilmember Rita Joseph shows up for every time she's invited. Some folks don't show up, so that's what we do. We send out invitations. We're having a harvest festival in September. In October, we're having open garden day, which I invite all of you to attend. June 6th, I'm coordinating open garden days. I hope to see all these attendees here. And then we do. So that's how we bring them on board. We have an event. Can you please be our guest? And we try to give them a place of honor. Councilmember Rita Joseph joked, she said, "Oh, I'd love to do story time in your garden." And we're like, "Okay, we'll take you up on that offer." So we find a specific role. We had a ribbon cutting ceremony when we did the water installation last October. So we invited Councilmember Rita Joseph, come and cut the ribbon, and we took photos. We always reciprocate. We send her photos from her event so she can then use it in her newsletter, her communication, because that's how you reflect or you show the larger community what you've done for your folks. So giving them, when we do our designs, our flyers, we make sure and we stand up, we say, Councilmember Rita Joseph is doing story time, can you come? We had someone from Reverend Kim Council, from Deputy Borough President from Brooklyn Borough President Office, as well as Antonio Reynoso, Borough President. He also came last year to our ribbon cutting. So we always make sure and invite them to events. So that's a very direct approach.
I think there's so many ways to answer this question. Also, I think one thing I'd like to highlight is really meeting, is volunteer in education, really. Meeting people where they're at and figuring out what might get them excited and then creating programs that meet them. So I would say, like in our K-12 programming in particular, we understand that teachers really want innovative, fun ways to teach STEM skills. We also know that 7th graders really like talking about sewage and poop. So that it's a perfect way to say, okay, how do we start embedding some of the understanding of the issues in the watershed and the cleanup of the canal into these education programs, and then start building the advocacy. We know that our high school students really need summer jobs, right? So how do we make a green job that is really an educational opportunity that can help set them up to see not only this is a job you can do in the summer, but you can actually build a career on environmental work. And then in volunteer, and I encourage folks that haven't signed up yet, we do, our stewardship manager, Reggie, is gonna be leading a rain garden volunteer session this afternoon. And it's just a great way to get your hands dirty and learn about the sewage system and the importance of green infrastructure in like a really fun, hands-on way.
Sometimes I wish I actually took notes, because if I could think about all the issues that were discussed this morning, it ranges from like this chronic infrastructure issues, chronic underfunding of the agency, inequities among the system, and in every single case, it really boils down to money, right? Even when it comes to like efficiency and capacity in an agency or a nonprofit partner, or even a grassroots group, it's usually about resources and access to resources. So advocacy is oftentimes boiled down to advocating for resources, advocating for funding for your issue area. And that issue, the tactic of advocacy, as I kind of alluded to before, is it will speak to the issue. So, you know, I love the example of the first panel with, you know, Center for Urban Future and New Yorkers for Parks. Like, I love that combination of like the research and advocacy coming together. It's something that, you know, you didn't mention it, Emily and I used to work together at New Yorkers for Parks. And one of the things that I noticed when I was there was transitioning from the arts and cultural community, which has a very robust singular voice around this idea of arts and culture as an industry speaking together to the city, to their elected officials. And that's something that when I moved over to the parks world a long time ago, there wasn't that like coalition. And you fast forward, 15 years, and now there are a lot of different coalitions, and each one kind of speaks to these different issues. The Parks and Open Space Coalition, which is a partner in this event in many ways, not only as an organizer, but also as a funder of the Green Fund that many folks, or organizer of the Green Fund, which many folks in this room rely on for that maintenance funding. So that coalition came together because there was the issue of something that came up before, a lack of attention to the dire need that we have as organizations for maintenance funding, and the lack of attention that funders pay on the fact that there's no funding for maintenance. What did they do? They advocated, created a coalition of funders to be able to raise money for operations and maintenance as an exclusive source, which was life-changing during the COVID years. You have the Play Fair Coalition, which advocates for something different. Another issue we came up, the lack of funding for the agency as a whole, which has cut jobs and cut services in park spaces among the agency. That coalition is a broad coalition that tries to elevate the issue and speak to the elected officials. And then you have the individual parks organizations going to their advocacy, or going there to elected officials, trying to get those capital repairs, trying to get a fence fixed or a park expanded that was promised through, say, I don't know, a rezoning, and trying to hold their elected officials accountable for those promises or for those fixes that need to be made. And through it all, that breeds inequity, right? And that's something that's come up a lot this morning too, which is, well, what about those spaces that don't have the voices? And I actually loved what Commissioner Marr had said earlier today, kicking off, which was the Parks Department doesn't have funding regularly to be able to address the infrastructure and the land that they're responsible for. And that's just kind of a mind-boggling thing that I didn't learn until I started working for New Yorkers for Parks, where, all of the capital budget, absent the Community Parks Initiative that came up during de Blasio, absent the CPI, all the capital funding is allocation-based, which means it's only there if groups actually ask for it, which means if a park space or community doesn't have those voices, and let's be honest, a voice is a privilege. A lot of communities, a lot of parks don't have a community that has the time, the resources to volunteer for parks. They could have issue areas that are just a higher quality of life priority, where parks isn't that on top of minds, and the quality of life of parks isn't top of minds because they have maybe some other serious issues that is a higher priority for their elected officials. And that means that a capital budget is going to be going to, and maintenance dollars is going to be going to the places with the strongest voice.
Thank you. I feel like that's a good segue to my next question, because you all represent really intersectional kind of issue areas, right? Like you're on this neighborhood level, you have rezonings that have not fully come through. Andrea, you're doing work around a Superfund site. Arlene, you were taking over vacant land that was otherwise just sitting in your community and not really serving a purpose that was benefiting residents. And Katie, you were just speaking to this really critical issue, right? Of like, how do we increase capacity? How do we kind of like broaden the tent and bring in more voices when that's not always something that's so easy to do? And I think for anyone who's on a community board, like Katie, myself, I know there's a lot of other folks who are community board members that can be really hard to bring people in. So I would love to get your perspectives on how we can help kind of collectively build advocacy capacity in every community. Like, what are some ideas that you think from your organization's perspective or the work that you've done would help us kind of collectively in the borough be able to reach more of those folks and bring them into this movement? Because I think intersectionality is something that has been like a real running theme throughout all of this morning's panels.
So one of the things in my community, and I love this idea of like a single issue area or even like a park feature that is across a geography or across the city, and having them folks come together. And you're a great example from Natural Areas Conservancy with Forest for All, which has really brought a lot of like different aspects of environmentalists, arborists, just park goers together under this single, for lack of a better word, like canopy of supporting trees. But and a singular example in my area is the North Brooklyn Dog Run Coalition. So they work, it is a very, very new coalition that came around this idea that everyone in this room, if you work in a park, knows the tension between park goers and dog owners. It's age old, it's never gonna go away. But it's the first time that I had seen sort of this coalition, dog stewards, dog owners coming together under this veil of advocacy and representing and bringing together like these singular dog run groups into one coalition. Now, some of the dog runs don't have those groups, and this goes to what I was saying before. In my district, you've got Cooper Park, you've got McGlorick Park, you've got Sternberg Park, and you have McCarran Park. All four have these neighborhood institutional dog runs that people rely on, but Cooper Park and Sternberg Park don't have this friends group that McGlorick Park and McCarran have. And by combining resources and enthusiasm and shared concerns around the state of our city's dog runs and the lack of maintenance dollars that go into our dog runs, they've been able to draw attention to these other dog runs, like Sternberg in particular, that our council member has tried to get a friends group for the dog run around for the last 2 years. Esteban's here, he knows. One person showed up over the 3 meetings that they organized. And by looping that dog run into the other 3, you're able to share that voice in those areas that don't necessarily have one.
I think, and this might not be a popular viewpoint in this room, but I think we need to stop being so focused on parks, quite honestly. Like, I think that we are siloizing ourselves by saying the Parks Department needs more funding when actually every agency that focuses on the management and capital improvements of the public realm needs more funding. And, Tim's point about like parks groups should be working with bids and transportation folks. We should also be working with watershed and resiliency folks, right? All of this public realm, this urban environment is our critical infrastructure, and climate change is going to wreak havoc on it if we don't start investing in maintenance. And I feel like we get too wonky in our own individual needs, and we don't kind of come together as a whole and say like, we just need to have a more livable city, right? So I would love to see us all start talking about that. Parks is critical infrastructure, but as part of the larger network.
We, Maple Street Community Garden, has been invited to participate in other coalitions by other organizations, or when the need arose, we would align ourselves. So when we first started, when we were in our infancy, we were part of the New York City Community Garden Coalition, which is focused on community gardens that are at risk for being either eliminated or shut down. So because of the nature of the fragility of our existence, we formed alliances with them. When Brooklyn Botanic Garden had their Fight for Sunlight campaign, we showed up in support of that campaign. Gardeners submitted testimonies, whether it's written or live. So we showed our support for them in their fight against the developers. More recently, we have collaborated with Green Gorillas. The Green Gorillas is a nonprofit here in New York. It's actually the precursor to Green Thumb. They support community gardens throughout the 5 boroughs, and they also support youth in the environmental and food justice movements. At the beginning of last weekend in February and first weekend in March, Green Gorillas hosted a 2-day advocacy workshop to get gardeners ready for the fiscal year 27 preliminary budget hearing. Again, to provide testimony to advocate on behalf of community gardens in the city. There were 4 main areas or 4 big asks. They were asking the city to increase funding for the Parks Equity Initiative, to set aside $300,000 for community gardens across the city, to access the funds in a more simplified way so that under-resourced gardens can tap into the fund. They also want to continue funding a Green in New York City, which is a project that provides green jobs and summer employment for youth. The third ask was to strengthen legislation, again, that to protect gardens from being rezoned or shut down, and also to continue funding the Get Clean New York City, again with the issue of rats, rodents, funding the Rat Academy, and also protecting against illegal dumping. So that's how we collaborate with other organizations on their campaigns or platforms. So we as a garden would show up and participate in their activities.
It's great, and I kind of want to flip the script a little bit. We have a lot of leaders of various coalitions and organizations in the room, so I would be curious to hear from you each, like, what kind of support do you feel like would have been needed or would have been most helpful from your peers to do the advocacy that you need to do for your individual and respective organizations? And how can other leaders in the movement be helpful? Arlene, you were just speaking really powerfully, right, about like this like activation of folks around moments like the budget hearing. So I'd be curious what other feedback that you all have that could really help kind of like expand this movement. And I think, Andrea, you were kind of speaking to that a bit ago as well with like, are we siloing ourselves? So I'd be curious what kind of advocacy strategies you feel like we need from other folks who might be in this space or otherwise.
Is this the one? Okay. So I think especially for, we've talked a lot about public-private partnerships, and I think, whenever you talk about advocacy, again, usually it's calling attention to something that's wrong, whether it's a lack of funding or inefficiency. And when you are at once an advocate and a partner to the city, sometimes you're limited in how you can discuss these issues in a way that doesn't impact the partners who you're trying to work together with. So I would say, in my work, if I'm a parks partner, or actually just a partner, to a lot of various governmental agencies. And in those relationships, and sometimes with those agreements, you rely on other partners that are more in the advocacy realm, more in the activist realm, to draw attention to these issues that maybe you don't have the ability to do because of those partnerships, because of those agreements. And so, I would say, especially for public-private partnerships, having advocacy partners, New Yorkers for Parks is great. They don't hold back with their voices. But then also, with my role, like with the open streets groups, those, and transportation advocates who are, standing side by side and saying this should be, an open street, or this should be a plaza. And that's something that, once that activism is successful, a public space manager, like my nonprofit partner of, say, DOT, can come in and manage the space and, manage strong public space management, strong fundraising, in my mind, is closing the loop on that advocacy. You have the activism, and then you have the sustainable maintenance in order to make this space successful in the long run.
Again, many ways to answer this question. I want to highlight funding because I think in particular, I think foundations need to be playing a really large role in supporting this kind of advocacy work. Certainly, I think the way the Green Fund, the System Change grant program that they came out with, that allowed us to form the Rain Coalition, which worked across the city to talk about rain garden maintenance. But it was because the funding stream was like, you were allowed to be speculative and test things out as opposed to having very clear deliverables. The funding was flexible, right? And I think that there's a need to increase that kind of funding stream to really come up with more innovative ways for us to all work together, because these kind of conferences don't happen on their own. They take a lot of people doing a lot of maybe volunteer work, and also a lot of paid work, right, to pull things together. And that collaboration really needs to be valued.
I try to be, as far as possible, proactive, not waiting until a need arises to try and find an ally or to develop a strategy. I'm a regular at the 71st Precinct monthly community meetings to discuss issues. Whenever we have events coming up, we talk about it. If we have a concern, we go to them. As I said, we have a member, the co-chair with me of the External Affairs is a member of Community Board 9. So I am always out there mixing with the crowd, forming alliances so that when something comes up, I know who to call on short notice. And it's not like I'm trying to initiate a relationship. It's like, I know you, I need help, let's see how best we can do this. And that has always been my personal, professional, volunteer approach for anything.
And maybe just to jump on that as well, like I think that like local relationship building is so critical, right? And like understanding who your neighbors are and what they want, even if it's not something that's at all related to what you want. Like, how can you have empathy and care? And really, that's where partnership comes, and that's where shared values come from.
Thank you both. I want to do a quick time check with Julian before we do. How much do we have left for the facilitated Q&A versus the audience Q&A?
Maybe last words for facilitated Q&A, and then we move on to that.
All right, perfect. So my final question for you before we turn it over to the floor, I would love for you all to share suggestions for how folks can get more involved in their local neighborhoods, with their local groups, or with other coalition partners. Let's say it's a really broad, you can think about it any way you wish. And I also would appreciate, like, what do you wish you knew as you were starting your own kind of journey, either professionally or as a volunteer in the spaces? I feel like sometimes it's helpful to get the perspectives of others who are maybe thinking about how they deepen their work in their communities around this issue or this kind of umbrella of issues, because parks touch on everything.
One thing I'm really glad that I didn't know when I was starting out in this role is how difficult New York City government is. Because I feel like I was able to then be like, oh, we could do anything. Anything is possible. And like, I feel like we get bogged down so often by like what doesn't work in this city. And the city itself gets bogged down. Like, it's like, oh, we had a fiscal crisis 30 years ago. We can never again be an effective government. But like, it's that optimism. I think that's really what we need.
Well, I'm an attorney by training. So when I went into Maple Street Community Garden, I knew what I was up against. I knew what's involved. I knew, but still I didn't expect the timeline is how long it took to get where we are. But in terms of the challenges that we were up against, I knew. But still, it was it was an onerous process.
I started out in government, so like the bureaucracy and how long it takes everything was not a surprise at all. I had firsthand experience in the inefficiencies, processes. But I think one of the things that was surprising, especially in the parks world, most especially in the transportation world, is just the sense of ownership that individuals have and the tension that that causes among neighbors. You know, whether it's a dog owner and a non-dog owner, whether it's, you know, a homeowner or a renter, you know, whether it's, I don't know, a tennis player or a soccer player, everybody, there's such limited space in the city of New York that every single half acre, every single yard is, you know, means something to somebody. And by dedicating it to one use, it ultimately means you're taking a use away from somebody else. And, you know, as, you know, again, managers of public space, you're kind of caught in the middle, and that could be a little jarring at times.
Thank you all so much. I'm now going to turn over the question portion to you all in the audience. So please raise your hand. All right, I saw your hand in the back first, and then we're going to go here to the front next.
Yes. Chris Bay, New York Outdoor Recreation Coalition. I asked a question earlier. I actually want to piggyback off of what Andrea said, and I don't mean to like put you on the spot, Katie, but she said something very interesting about how siloing the needs of parks and not looking at the broader needs may actually be hurting us. I know earlier I mentioned the EPF, which is the Environmental Protection Fund at the state level for anyone that doesn't know, and the city has benefited a lot from the EPF, particularly with waterfront parks. And so, I mean, the reason I said Katie put you on the spot is because one of the parts of the city, and there's a lot of very expensive real estate over there, that doesn't have substantial infrastructure with waterfront parks that protects us against storm surges is in North Brooklyn. And I did not know until this conference that how much of that land possibly is privately owned. Someone brought up Hudson River Park a little earlier, and my understanding is that a lot of that is actually owned by the state. The piers are owned by the state. And it was very easy for the state legislature to turn that over to the trust, you know, once the viaduct was torn down on the West Side Highway to build a park. But privately owned land is a whole different, you know, animal. So my question is, and I know with Gowanus Canal Conservancy, same thing there is, you know, it's a waterfront. Storm surges, there's the same issue. So you could benefit from the EPF, but if the land is privately owned, first you have to acquire it, right? Or figure out a deal. So my question is how are you building coalitions to advocate when these are all pieces of land, you know, and maybe in different community boards, multiple property owners, you know, but you're trying to build something like a Greenway Trail, and I know Hunter already left, but we do have the staffer from the borough president's office over there, so maybe she wanted to chime in.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, that boils down to, in my mind, if I understand your question, one of the biggest lessons learned and mistakes of the 2005 Greenpoint Williamsburg rezoning. And, you know, Andrea and I often talk about how we're sort of like sister organizations because of, you know, the environmental legacies that both of our communities are scarred with, and then also these transformative rezonings that we've both sort of gone through or have gone through, and that some of that is ensuring that the mistakes that were made, you know, 20 plus years ago aren't necessarily made again in these rezonings. The waterfront parkland that was required to be built by any development, and I think this is what you're talking about, that any development was required to build waterfront parkland along the Greenpoint Williamsburg waterfront. That's outside of, say, Bushwick Inlet Park, which is a 27-acre waterfront park, Transmitter Park, which is what, like 4 acres, or you have Newtown Barge or Box Street, or, you know, any one of those city-owned waterfront parks. In between, you have this parcel approach. And the developers that build the housing also would develop the land. In almost every case, they would hand it over to the Parks Department to manage. In the best cases, and I hate, is this being recorded? In the best cases, the developer actually commits to building out and maintaining the land at a gold standard. Of course, you know, Domino Park and Domino Square are like the prime examples. And so in the cases where that doesn't happen, you know, you do have privately developed but public land. In my mind, it's quite different than what was referred to before as like a POP, like a privately owned public space, a POS, because it's actually public space that becomes public parkland. However, the developer is still responsible for paying for the maintenance. What happened then was a piecemeal approach to not only how the waterfront was designed, but ultimately how it was maintained. So you can walk from one block to the next block and have a very different experience in that park, not just from Domino Park and Marsh T. Johnson is a whole other park, a state park, one of two state parks in the borough of Brooklyn, unless you count under the Cape Bridge Park, which is a state park, but it is state DOT property and public parkland. Where was I? Waterfront, parkland, even in Newtown Barge Park, which is city owned, is abuts the Esplanade of Greenpoint Landing, and you walk from here to there in a 2-foot span, and you can tell one is maintained by one entity and one is maintained by the other entity, and that is just shitty.
Yeah. So building on that, I think that we, in Gowanus, we really tried to take the lesson from that and say, actually, we need a comprehensive vocabulary for the public realm, and it needs to be maintained comprehensively. We didn't, however, say it all needs to be turned over to either city or state government. And I think we did look at that, at like, should this be something we advocate for? And frankly, our government doesn't have money to take on that kind of space, right? The developers do. So the thing that we need to do is then make sure that we are holding those developers to policies that will protect their residents and the residents that are, on the land behind them, through things like the Coastal Resiliency Zoning Code, through in the Lowlands Master Plan, which governs a lot of the new public spaces along Gowanus, which was then encoded into city zoning code through a waterfront access plan. We require a high and dry path all along the canal, but we also incentivize lower areas to actually get down to the water and build boat launches, etc. It's actually a lot easier to do that on private property than it is on parks property sometimes. So but then the long term, how do we make sure it's actually managed? That's why we're doing the bid formation effort in Gowanus, because that's going to be a way that we get all these private properties, they're all on the hook to pay for that maintenance, but how do they pay the same entity that's going to actually have the care, that's going to be from the neighborhood, make jobs for the neighborhood, and really prioritize making that comprehensive public space. And then I just would say, I think another thing in Gowanus in particular, why it's so important that it is privately owned land, is these sites are super contaminated. City land, especially on the waterfront, is really, really complicated, and if we can get a private owner to pay for some of the needs, that's actually a benefit to all of our coffers.
All right, I think we had, thanks, I got the 5-minute warning. I think we had another question here in the front, and then I will go in the back. So here's sir in the front, and then you'll be third on deck.
Yeah, thank you. This is, I guess, a question for Katie and Arlene, sorry, I can. So I'm Daniel Latore. I started the digital placemaking program at Project for Public Spaces back in 2010. And so I've been to a lot of these events, and one of the recurring themes is, too siloed. We need more intersectionality. It's like a season. It comes and it goes, and it comes and it goes, and it comes and it goes. And because my work is in digital, I'm mostly about what are the models that we are embedding, right? What are the paradigms that we are embedding, the structures that we're embedding? Because that leads to path dependency in the same way that when you pour concrete, you're kind of stuck with however that is arranged. So the thing that's hitting me today, and I really just love that this is the inaugural. I can't believe it's the first one. We need more of this, so much more of this, more local. Besides the big national conferences or whatever, larger ones. Bigger is not better. What's hitting me today though is we have these new networks now. What has changed is Partnership for Parks, and there's other geographic or sort of institutional networks. So there's been good, that's all great. But what's really hitting me today, and maybe it's because my grandmother passed away, my last living grandmother passed away in January. And I went through this whole trip on elderhood and the fact that our society has the most aged people, but it seems politically, socially, we have very, very few elders. So part of this is about mentorship. So like Katie and Arlene, like how do we pass on this knowledge and not just let it dissipate? You know, where is the mentoring in a much more infrastructure funded way? Because we're not gonna be able to change the academic silos anytime soon that divide everything into like these neat categories that are not how our life world and our lived experience is. But back to the community-centric way, the question is, do you think that would help? Or is that not really the issue? Because it feels to me like there's a missing thing here about how do we transition, where's the generational thinking in Brooklyn, in New York?
Thank you for that. That's a very, very critical question. This year, I'm serving as co-chair with Brenda Pagan of the External Affairs, and our focus is on, my focus as part of my Cornell University program is to build a youth cohort in the garden. My nieces are 18 and 13, and they grew up in the garden, right? So now I'm looking at, if I want to sort of sit back and enjoy an emeritus status, we need to cultivate the next generation. Hence the reason I reached out to Green Gorillas to bring in their youth cohort. And at the other end of the spectrum is our elders are missing from the garden. And a lot of them have very valuable gardening skill, gardening knowledge that they need to pass on, or we need to keep in the garden, but just also as a way to socially involve them in the garden. So that elder senior, we are hoping to plan our first senior social soiree in the garden this September or October. For that same reason, that we need to have our elders in the garden. So yes, that's a concerted effort on our part to do intergenerational stuff in the garden.
And then quickly, maybe we can just go to our Elder Parks Committee Chair, Elder Illuminary Parks Committee Chair, for a final question.
I'm Deborah Williams from CB16, and my question is advocacy. Do they still have the IOBY as in, no? Well, that's back in my day. That's who I dealt with as an advocacy group. And also with Green Thumb. How would I navigate? Because like you were saying about ownership, a lot of us, we volunteer for these gardens, and then we do more volunteering than anybody else, and then we get that thing that we own this. So I want to know how, do I navigate? Because in a couple of days I have someone to talk to about that. So I want to know, how do I navigate myself in talking with this person, and to say that this is a shared, thing. It's not one person's garden. Thank you.
Well, each Green Thumb Garden has a community engagement coordinator. So I would use that as a point person in terms of if there is some sort of dynamic in your garden that needs to be addressed, I would use that as a jumping off point. It sounds to me also that there may be some organizational, structural issues in the garden. We are at Maple Street Community Garden pretty solid. We have bylaws, we have committees, we have gardening committees, compost committee, we have bi-monthly general meetings, but we also have a monthly, also a bi-monthly community leaders or community coordinator meeting. So we have mechanisms by which to address any conflict that may arise in the garden. But when I attended Green Gorillas workshops a couple weeks ago, I was hearing stories similar to what you're describing, where there are other smaller gardens that have either maybe a long-standing member who was running it for a while, and then some newcomers came and they want to change things a bit. There's some resistance. There is, a tension there. So that's usually points to a structural issue. I would go to your engagement, you know how to find your engagement coordinator, right? I would go there and start that as the process in terms of how do we democratize or open up the leadership thing. That's what I would do.
And Ms. Williams, I would just mention, I'm a member of Brooklyn Community Board 5, and I serve on our Parks and Environment Committee. My co-chair, Ora Goodwin, is also a really active community and longtime community gardener, so I'm sure she would be happy to share some tips, because she's been running Success Garden for many, many years. So, yeah. All right, I know everyone is eager for lunch. Thank you so much for sticking it out through this final panel. I really want to thank our fantastic panelists for offering such valuable insights. So kudos to you all. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Julian.
Great, thank you so much, Emily, Katie, Andrea, and Arlene. What an incredible panel to wrap up on. Can we just give another round of applause to the speakers and to all of you for the home stretch? I just want to reflect. There were too many incredible things said by too many incredible friends today, and I just want to reflect on a couple of things. Dwayne pointed out the need for deeper, coordinated conversations, and Andrea just now made a couple of appeals to a stronger, unified voice. And I just want to underline that is exactly what we're trying to do today. The exact work that the coalition is trying to set up, that work is not done and it is not yet path dependent. So I hope that all of you, can think of ways to get involved. Please reach out to me. We'll send follow-ups over the course of the day. But this really is the start of something historic, and we want to make sure that you can all be a part of it and all feel that you're part of something. Tim, yes.
Give me your cards.
Quick announcement. Give Tim your cards. We'll make sure it's recorded. There will be some follow-up. And then without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Elios Rodriguez. Please give Elios and Deborah a round of applause for their incredible staff time devoted to this. This wouldn't have been done without them. It wouldn't have been done without the support of the Prospect Park Alliance and Morgan making sure that there's a backbone to this movement. So thank you all for that, and thank you all for being a part of it.
And you.
Yes.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'll keep this as Sabrina Carpenter short and sweet because you have already endured a long day of speeches. I just want to thank you all again. Morgan mentioned it at the beginning of the programming, but you guys are the ones that are on the ground, stepping up to address a crisis that has been building up over years now for our city's parks. On my personal experience, I came here to New York City as an immigrant 9 years ago, and the only third space that I could use to hang out with my friends were parks. I used to go to Roosevelt Island right after high school, and that's where I would hang out most of the afternoon. So I'm very lucky that I'm now here able to continue to advocate for green space. As Morgan mentioned at the beginning, we're talking about affordability. What is more affordable than a city park? Nothing. In terms of logistics, if you order lunch, it is now at the table. I encourage you to grab it. Please enjoy it. We are gonna have some afternoon workshops. One of them is gonna be right here, is being led by Partnership for Parks is going to be speaking about the Green Fund. I encourage you to stick around. In the meantime, please enjoy yourself, linger, make the connections. We really are hoping for this to be an opportunity for you to network and to introduce to each other and to really put the action into building the coalition that we have been hoping throughout the entire morning to build. That being said, I want to introduce our very last speaker, our collaborator in this monumentous day, Nicholas alma mater, chair of the Parks Committee for Community Board 9.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Sorry I was not able to make it earlier this morning. I know I was part of the program. I just want to take a few minutes to thank everybody for coming. I would like to do some acknowledgement for this project because this is something I dreamed of about 3 years ago. I brought it to the Prospect Park Alliance and they decided to run with it. And I'm so happy to see how these things happen. I want also to acknowledge the presence of Carolyn Church from the Board President's Office, who has been very instrumental in helping develop that, to get the sponsorship to develop that. And also I'd like to acknowledge about Berlotte Antoine, who is from Community Board 17, she's not able to make it today. She and I spoke about this for about 2 years before we finally to get it done. So we hope this is one of many, because I think the need for us to come and talk together about parks. And I'm hoping next time we come, we'll talk about not just park, playgrounds, and the other activities that to the park. Talk about specifically cultural activities that should be done to the park that we protected it. I want to thank you for this opportunity. I want to thank you for coming. I thank you to make this idea a reality. So enjoy your lunch and see you in the workshops.
Another quick announcement, if everybody would like lunch that hasn't ordered lunch, there is a cafe downstairs that can be patroned.
Yes, and we have some bagels left over, so please don't stop you from